Chapter 977. Judas didn't deny his identity, and immediately admitted it under Han Shuo's questioning. After Judas admitted his identity as the God of Light, Han Shuo finally understood why Judas dared to stay after witnessing Han Shuo's power even though all the other hegemons had left. An overgod with a quintessence was 100 times more powerful than a so-called pseudo-overgod like Daka. Even though the two had similar names, they weren't on the same level at all. Daka and the rest were afraid of Han Shuo's power, but the God of Light with a quintessence didn't have to worry about being killed by Han Shuo at all. God of Light, why are you a hegemon of the God Hunter Alliance? Han Shuo's face turned cold. Are you implying that the existence of the God Hunter Alliance is the result of your tacit consent? The goddess of destiny helplessly nodded and extended her hand to release a strange energy wave. The vast energy instantly enveloped the entire area. Be it in the sky or on the ground, no one would be able to see what was going on. The God Hunter Alliance's existence is necessary. Otherwise, this so-called alliance would have long been wiped out by us, said the goddess of destiny unhurriedly after sealing off the entire area. Why? Han Shuo asked blankly. The goddess of destiny smiled and didn't answer Han Shuo's question. She looked at the God of Light and the over-God of Death beside her and said, Gentlemen, I think we should tell him about Eternia in advance. Sure, but before that, I want to destroy Han Hao's quintessence shard first. Nestor nodded and stared at the little skeleton sitting in the middle of the bone throne as he spoke in a tone that left no room for negotiation. Han Shuo's expression changed as soon as he heard those words. He said, I don't care what you guys are trying to do to me, but whoever dares to touch Han Hao, I will kill them. Nestor shot a disdainful glance at Han Shuo and mocked. Do you have the strength to fight to the death with me? After that, Nestor no longer looked at Han Shuo. His body shook violently, and the purest energy of death in the world was released from his body. All of a sudden, the God of Death walked towards Han Shuo. An incomparably vast energy of death emanated from his body and caused a commotion in the surroundings. Han Shuo was shocked, but he still shouted, I'd like to try. Nestor said that he wanted to destroy the quintessence shard in Han Hao's body, which had already fused with his soul. Once it was destroyed, it would mean that Han Hao's soul would dissipate, and he would disappear from this world forever. Han Shuo would never allow such a situation to occur. His relationship with Little Skull even surpassed the friendship he had with his women. Little Skull accompanied him when he had nothing. Little Skull helped him dump the trash and cleaned up for him every day. Little Skull had become the most indispensable part of his life. No one could touch Little Skull in front of him, not even Nestor. With one thought, the 13 avatars that surged into the cauldron of myriad demons surged out. The avatars formed by the 6 elemental energies of death, destruction, thunder, darkness, wind, and water instantly overlapped, and a new domain of divinity was suddenly released. This time, unlike before, when his consciousness was completely exhausted, the 6 elemental energies overlapped easily. However, because Han Shuo did not have time to master the new consciousness and stabilize his current state of mind, he could only temporarily control the new avatars formed by the 6 elemental energies. The new energy formed a barrier formed by the energy of death, destruction, thunder, darkness, wind, and water. It suddenly blocked in front of Han Hao, the Little Skull, to stop the attack of the overgod of death, Nestet's energy. Facing the overgod of death, Nestet, who had an overgod, Han Shuo no longer held back and unleashed all of his power in an instant. At this moment, Han Shuo focused his consciousness to control everything. The new body formed by the new domain of divinity was very special. There seemed to be 6 streams of energy flowing on the new barrier. Huh! The goddess of destiny exclaimed softly. She seemed to be very surprised by this new energy. She turned to look at Gandalf, the avatar of the God of Light, and asked, What's going on? Gandalf smiled bitterly. He shook his head at the goddess of destiny's question and said, I don't know what's going on either. Perhaps the power Upanishad he cultivates has some magical changes with the power of our universe. That's why he has this anomaly. After a pause, Gandalf said, "Don't worry too much. This new energy is not perfect. It won't be able to exert too much power even if it's combined. Everything is still under control. Everything is still under control." The goddess of destiny had a strange look on her face. She murmured, "This is just the beginning. He hasn't fully mastered the new energy. Once he does, I think the power will not be the same as it is now. This Brian really makes people look forward to it, and worry about him at the same time." Although the goddess of destiny's voice was soft, who was Gandalf? How could he not hear what he was thinking? Gandalf had a strange look on his face. He seemed to have realized that Han Sho was extraordinary. His eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. At this moment, the power of Nestet, the god of death, fell on the barrier formed by the power of the 6 elements that Han Sho had formed. It had to be said that a god with the power of a quintessence was far more powerful than an ordinary god. As soon as Nestet's power of death entered the barrier, Han Sho felt an endless aura of the element of death. Nestet's power of death seemed to have condensed the element of death from several planes, and its power far exceeded that of any so-called god. Under the unparalleled power of Nestet, the barrier formed by the power of the 6 elements that Han Sho had yet to fully master could barely hold on. It could be torn apart and destroyed at any moment. Not only could a god with the power of a quintessence mobilize the purest element of death between heaven and earth, but they themselves were also a huge body of energy. Their bodies contained the essence of their elemental power for hundreds of millions of years. Such power was not something an ordinary person could imagine. If Han Sho had not formed a new incarnation and merged the power of the 6 elements, he might not have been able to withstand a single attack from Nestet. The power of his consciousness turned into threads that were hard to see with the naked eye, and fused with the incarnation. It continuously gathered the power of the various elements on the new barrier of divinity. Han Sho's face was slightly pale. "Oh, not bad. Apart from the gods with the power of a quintessence, no one can resist me for this long," Nestet exclaimed in surprise. He immediately exerted the power of death on the new barrier formed by Han Sho, and increased the pressure on Han Sho. "Father!" Little Skull shouted. Little Skull, who was telepathically connected to Han Sho, naturally sensed the abnormality in Han Sho's consciousness. He knew that Han Sho was practically using up the power of his soul to save himself. Demonic yuan could be regenerated after it was lost, but once the power of one's soul was exhausted, it would be extremely difficult to recover. Han Hao, the little skull who cultivated the power of death and demonic arts, knew this very well. Therefore, after learning that Han Sho was risking his life for him, Little Skull became somewhat agitated. Suddenly, the image of a huge gravestone appeared. Little Skull used all his strength to combine the power of the demonic arts he cultivated and the bone spear in his hand. He tried to seize the opportunity to rush out and fight to the death with Nestet. The radiance that covered the gravestone suddenly burst out. The power of death and the power of demonic arts collided and blended together, blossoming with a brilliant brilliance. Ring, ring, ring! Ring, ring, ring! A clear, earth-shaking sound rang out from the gravestone. Suddenly, the gravestone transformed into a diamond-shaped, sparkling, and translucent strange object. That strange object spun and continuously released the negative energies of death and evil. There seemed to be an endless amount of resentment and violence within it. "Nestet, stop!" the goddess of destiny shouted. The mirror of destiny flew out of her hand, and the power that affected the trajectory of fate surged out. Nestet's eyes trembled. He suddenly retracted the power of death and retreated to the goddess of destiny's side. He looked at the goddess of destiny angrily and asked, "Why? That kid has a quintessence shard on him. I will not allow a threat to replace me to exist." The goddess of destiny did not answer Nestet. Instead, she focused on the strange crystal spinning on Little Skull's chest. She had a look of disbelief on her face. Gandalf's mouth was wide open. He muttered in a daze, "How is this possible? How is this possible? How is this possible?" Nestet followed the gazes of the goddess of destiny and the god of light to look at Han Hao. Suddenly, Nestet's face turned pale. He lost his composure and exclaimed, This is. The goddess of destiny nodded and affirmed, This is the power of the quintessence. A new quintessence has formed in his body. Han Shuo, who was still struggling to hold on, was startled when he heard this. He also looked at Han Hao in disbelief, his face full of astonishment and confusion. A quintessence. Not a quintessence shard. The most inconceivable and mysterious thing in the universe had actually formed in Little Skull's chest. On Elysium, the reason why the 12 overgods reigned supreme over everyone else wasn't because they were exceptionally talented, or because they were famous, or because they had lived for a long time. It was because each of them possessed a quintessence. That's right, a quintessence. A quintessence made them the pinnacle of existence in the universe. An overgod with a quintessence was the embodiment of invincibility, the undefeatable legend. But today, a new quintessence had formed in Han Hao. What did this mean? Nestet, the goddess of destiny, Gandalf, Han Shuo, and even the little skull, Han Hao, were all dumbfounded. Which element did the new quintessence come from? The same question popped up in their minds. Chapter 978. Everyone was dumbfounded, including Little Skull Han Hao himself. His eyes were filled with confusion as he looked down at the diamond-shaped crystal spinning on his chest. He suddenly felt as if the crystal had become another part of his soul. Under the influence of the new quintessence, all kinds of negative energies, such as hatred, disgust, resentment, and exposure, seemed to be affected as they surged towards him from all directions. The new quintessence seemed to be the source of all negative energies in the world. It constantly attracted the scattered negative energies and integrated them for Little Skull Han Hao's use. The diamond-shaped quintessence on Han Hao's chest spun once before it abruptly flew into his mind. It was enveloped by his divine soul and became one with it. The white bone throne instantly blossomed with a soft, jade-like radiance. Perhaps it was due to the new quintessence, but the white bone throne also seemed to be undergoing some unknown changes. Han Shuo, who was standing not far from Little Skull, wore a puzzled expression. He also didn't know why Little Skull Han Hao would undergo such an incredible change. Han Shuo wasn't too sure what a quintessence meant, but the fact that the 12 overgods held such a high position on Elysium gave him a faint feeling of ecstasy. Han Shuo sensed an aura that was both familiar and strange at the same time from Little Skull. He wasn't sure how powerful the new energy was, but judging from the goddess of destiny, the god of light, and the overgod of death's reactions, he was certain that the new quintessence had indeed formed. Why is there a new quintessence? Judas muttered to himself. The peaceful smile on his face had disappeared and was replaced by confusion. Didn't they say that only 12 quintessences have been created since the beginning of time? I've never heard of the existence of a new quintessence after millions of years. The overgod of death, Nestet, was equally puzzled. He stared blankly at the goddess of destiny as if waiting for her to give him a reasonable explanation. However, the goddess of destiny was also baffled. How could she answer his question? After a while, the goddess of destiny smiled bitterly and said, Don't look at me. Even I don't know why new quintessences can be produced. I can't control this Han Hao's fate. His existence is beyond my understanding of this universe. I don't know what this exception is all about. What should we do? Nestet suddenly asked after a moment of silence. The goddess of destiny did not immediately answer Nestet's question. Instead, she looked at Han Shuo and Han Hao with a thoughtful look. After a while, the goddess of destiny said solemnly, Nestet, Han Hao's new quintessence has been produced. I don't think you need to worry about him taking your quintessence of death. This father and son pair should be of help to us in the future. Now I think we should leave first. The overgod of death, Nestet, was stunned. He stared deeply at Han Hao, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. The little skull, Han Hao, who was sitting in the middle of the white bone throne, looked at the overgod of death, Nestet, as if he was facing a formidable enemy. He was afraid that Nestet would attack him at all costs. Although there was something special in his divine soul, Han Hao did not know how to use the quintessence. At this time, it was difficult for him to make full use of the quintessence. At this time, if the Overgod of Death, Nestet, wanted to attack him at all costs, Han Hao was obviously no match for him. Han Shu was also very cautious. His main body and 12 incarnations were carefully preparing. If Nestet really wanted to attack, he would immediately stop him. Nestet, there are some things that the three of us can't decide, Judas suddenly said softly at this moment. The Overgod of Death, Nestet, shot a glance at Judas, nodded slightly, and said, "Before we go to Eternia, we still have a battle. If you still dare to use this rotten body of yours, I will first destroy a strand of your divine seal." After saying that, Nestet looked at Han Hao and lightly groaned. Without saying anything else, he nodded at the Goddess of Destiny and left. After Nestet disappeared, the Goddess of Destiny slightly bunched her brows and said to Judas, "You shouldn't meddle in the affairs of the God Hunter Alliance, nor should you occupy Judas' consciousness. The God Hunter Alliance needs to exist, but it doesn't need you to guide it." The God of Light, who had occupied Judas' body, put on a rather solemn face when he heard the Goddess of Destiny's words. He hesitated for a moment before replying smilingly, "I know what to do. I don't need you to remind me. When we leave this place, Judas will disappear forever. He will never appear on Elysium again." The Goddess of Destiny smiled and nodded, saying, "That's good." The God of Light then turned to look at Han Shu and Han Hao. After thinking for a moment, he smilingly said to the two, "Before Eternia opens, a new battle of the gods will inevitably take place. On behalf of the Dominion of Light, the Dominion of Life, and the Dominion of Water, I would like to invite you to join forces. Haha, don't be in a hurry to refuse or agree. Take your time to consider." When Han Shu saw that the God of Light was about to leave, he suddenly remembered McKinley's plea and said, "I want to kill one of your 3 guardians, Jar." The God of Light stared blankly at Han Shu. After a while, he frowned and said, "Jar has been with me for many years. Only I can decide his life. If Jar dies, I will take it that you refused my kind offer. You're on your own." The God of Light bowed to the Goddess of Destiny and slowly walked outside. When he reached the Goddess of Destiny, he suddenly paused and said softly, "Compared to Han Hao, I'm more worried about my father, who confused the 12 fundamental forces. We have all the quintessences, so we at least have some idea of how strong they are. But when it comes to energy that is completely foreign to us, we don't know what to do. You have to put in more effort, lest things get messy." After saying these words, the God of Light did not stay any longer and left leisurely. The last words that the God of Light said to the Goddess of Destiny were not deliberately concealed. Han Shu and Han Hao, who were standing not far away, heard it clearly. From the meaning of the God of Light's words, Han Shu knew that the so-called 12 quintessences, including the Goddess of Destiny, should have some designs on him. As for what they wanted him to do, Han Shu had no idea for the time being. After the Overgod of Death, Nestet, and the God of Light disappeared, the Goddess of Destiny smiled lightly and said indifferently, "I am very relieved that Andrina is here with you. I hope you will take good care of her. Well, I still have things to deal with. When the time is right, I will come to you personally and talk to you about some things you want to know." Han Shu really did not know what to say to the Goddess of Destiny. He obviously knew that the Goddess of Destiny was hiding something from him, and he also knew that the Goddess of Destiny had expectations for him. However, if the Goddess of Destiny did not tell him the details, he really could not know the ins and outs of the matter. Vaguely, Han Shu guessed that it had something to do with the exalted demon lord and the demonic arts he cultivated. Apart from that, Han Shu really could not think of anything else that the Goddess of Destiny, a quintessence over God, would be concerned about. Han Shu did not say much to the Goddess of Destiny. He just watched as the Goddess of Destiny disappeared without saying a word. With the Goddess of Destiny gone, only Han Shu and Han Hao remained in the ruins of the Pandemonium. After the battle, both father and son had made breakthroughs in their own strength. Han Shuo's demonic arts had advanced to the demonic sovereign realm, allowing him to transform hundreds and thousands of demon generals into avatars that cultivated in the 13 fundamental forces. The 13 avatars could also be fused, and every time they fused, their strength would increase tremendously. Han Hao, on the other hand, had undergone an earth-shattering transformation. A new quintessence was formed in his body, a treasure that could allow him to become a supreme god. Such a breakthrough was not as simple as a quantitative change. At this moment, the father and son looked at each other. They did not think too much about the changes in their bodies. Instead, they looked at the ruins of the pandemonium and felt a little sad. Han Shuo did not know where Gilbert, Sanguiner, and Balans had gone. He was rather worried about their safety. "Father, the pandemonium has been destroyed," Han Hao suddenly said to Han Shuo after a long while. Han Shuo nodded and smiled. He said, "If it's destroyed, we'll rebuild it. Every time we rebuild it, there will be new changes. This time, I will use our current strength to rebuild the pandemonium. I will deploy a gigantic ninth realm mystical Yin harvester around the perimeter of the pandemonium to transform the yuan qi of heaven and earth on the Elysium continent for our use." Back on the profound continent, the exalted demon lord had deployed a gigantic ninth realm mystical Yin harvester underground. It was because of the ninth realm mystical Yin harvester that the profound continent had become a land of 5 elements, causing all sorts of changes on the profound continent and allowing Han Shuo's soul to travel from another universe. Compared to the profound continent, the yuan qi here was 100 times denser. By deploying a gigantic ninth realm mystical Yin harvester here, not only would Han Shuo be able to provide an endless supply of energy to the pandemonium, but he would also be able to use the yuan qi to temper his demonic body. By gathering the yuan qi of heaven and earth, he would be able to accumulate the demonic yuan in his demonic body. As long as his demonic body and mind could reach the demonic sovereign realm, Han Shuo believed that he would stand a chance against the 12 overgods who had existed for eons. Apart from that, he also had 13 avatars that he could fuse with. With 6 avatars, he would be able to fend off Nestet's attacks. Once all 13 avatars were fused together, coupled with his main body that had reached the demonic sovereign realm, who on the Elysium continent would be a match for him. Chapter 979. Han Shuo and his son didn't stay in the ruined pandemonium for too long. Too many things had happened here. They didn't know if the hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were still in the fringe. They also didn't know how the members of the Han family, Wasis and Salas, were doing. First, he had to figure out the current situation in the fringe and find Balans, Sanguiner, and Phoebe to ensure their safety. Next, he had to head to the Amphilas to see what was going on there. He also had to find out what the missing tire was up to. Lastly, he had to rebuild the pandemonium and turn it into a giant ninth realm mystical Yin harvester for him to become a demon lord. There were too many things for Han Shuo to do. He had to take things one step at a time. He didn't have time to waste. Now that little skull Han Hao had suddenly gained the quintessence, he might not be able to fully unleash the power of the quintessence. However, if he were to face pseudo-overgods like Tyre and Log, Han Shuo believed that Little Skull would be able to handle them with ease. Therefore, he arranged for Little Skull Han Hao to head to the mountain where most of Daka, Dagmar, and Asur's subordinates were killed. He had to gather his god hunters to figure out the current situation in the fringe as soon as possible, track down the whereabouts of Tyre and Log, and pay attention to the hegemons who had left. Little Skull Han Hao was brimming with confidence. With the quintessence, he would be able to shine in the fringe and on Elysium. With Han Shuo's arrangements, he quickly left the fringe and headed towards his destination through the torn earth. Han Shuo expanded his consciousness and headed towards another region by relying on the faint connection he had with the 5 elite zombies. Han Shuo, whose mental state had reached the level of a demon master, his consciousness was as vast and boundless as the ocean. His sea of consciousness could reflect all kinds of wonders like a bright mirror according to his will. That trace of weak connection with the 5 elite zombies was infinitely magnified. He very quickly determined the location of the 5 elite zombies. Suddenly, Han Sho realized that as his state of mind improved, his consciousness had become different from before. When he unfolded his consciousness, he could vaguely sense the soul undulations of every living being in the fringe. The stronger a person was, the stronger their life magnetic field would be, and the easier it would be for him to sense them. Gradually, many powerful yet scattered auras entered Han Sho's mind. Han Sho was very familiar with a few. Some were Tyre, some were Log, some were Salus, and some were Wasis. Han Sho's mind was suddenly enlightened. He grinned. He felt as though he was in control of heaven and earth. Before his new state of mind had completely stabilized, he had already experienced the wonders of it. He immediately realized that the realm of the Demon Master was indeed very powerful. Just the changes in his divine sense had already allowed him to see everything in his surroundings clearly, as if he was the Lord of all things. After thinking for a moment, Han Sho decided to start with Salus and Wasis, who were closest to him. With one thought, Han Sho vanished into thin air. Relying on his senses of Salus and Han Sho's auras, Han Sho streaked across the sky at a speed that was difficult for the naked eye to follow. Soon enough, he stopped beside a lake. "Salus, Wasis, come out." Han Sho smiled and said to a broken stone wall behind the lake. Salus and Wasis, who were meditating in the crack of the stone wall, were worried about whether Han Sho could escape from Gandalf and the others. As soon as they heard Han Sho's voice, they were overjoyed and hastily crawled out from the crack of the stone wall. "Brian, are you all right?" Salus grinned, revealing his true feelings. Wasis wasn't a good talker. His cold eyes scanned Han Sho's body as though he was trying to see if Han Sho was injured or if he was forcing a smile. Han Sho felt a little strange when he saw Salus and Wasis again. When he first came to the fringe, Salus and Wasis were the most hostile to him. There were even some unpleasant incidents between him and Salus and Wasis. They even fought to the death, and one of them nearly died. But now, the ones who were the closest to Han Sho were Salus and Wasis. The reason for that was that although Salus and Wasis were bad-tempered and arrogant, they were sincere in their dealings with others. They weren't like Asura, Log, and Tyre who pretended to be on good terms with you but would stab you in the back. "Haha, I'm fine." Han Sho looked at the two smilingly and said, "But the crisis in the fringe has yet to be resolved. Those from the Godhunter Alliance have yet to leave the fringe. All right, I'll go look for my Han family and make arrangements for them. After that, we will head to the Amphalos together. I can sense that Tyre and Log are in the vicinity of the Amphalos and their remaining forces. It seems that Tyre and Log will make a move soon. We'll do as you say." Salus laughed heartily and said, "After the previous battle, I, Salus, believe that my judgment is right. You are different from Tyre and Log. Only someone like you can convince me." Unlike Salus, Wasis didn't say what was on his mind, but after hearing his words, Wasis nodded solemnly, seemingly agreeing with Salus's statement. Although the two of them didn't vow to follow Han Sho, their attitude was enough to show that they would definitely follow Han Sho's lead in the fringe. From now on, Han Sho would completely replace Log and Tyre, becoming the one and only sovereign in the fringe. The Amphalos. The Amphalos was no longer as bustling as it used to be. Not only had the sovereigns evacuated their businesses in the Amphalos, but more than half of the shops in Tanai had also closed down. Those who remained in the Amphalos were those who had nowhere to hide and had nowhere else to run. Everyone knew that not only did the Godhunter Alliance outnumber the fringe dwellers, but they also had plenty of top-notch experts in the fringe. Even those peddlers who used to fear the sovereigns didn't think that the sovereigns would be able to stop the dragons from the other dominions. In the past, the Amphalos could guarantee everyone's safety. But now, the Amphalos didn't have the slightest bit of protection. From the information transmitted by Gale of the Fringe, it was clear that the Godhunter Alliance had gained the upper hand. Those who remained in the Amphalos grew even more anxious. If they weren't wanted fugitives by the 12 alliances and had nowhere else to go, they would have left the Amphalos at all costs. Most of the shops in Tanai had closed down. The only shop that still hung its signboard was the Celestial Pro Pharmacy. During this period of time, the remaining shop owners in the Amphilos had made the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy their main source of information. Even those who specialized in making poisons would stop by the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy from time to time to obtain information from the only shop in the Amphilos. At this moment, the one in charge of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy was Akeley. He was the first person that Han Shuo met when he arrived on Elysium. He had already reached early-stage High God realm in the cultivation of the Edict of Destruction. Akeley, who had a stubborn obsession in his heart, was advancing at an incredibly fast pace in the cultivation of the Edict of Destruction. With the divine essences that he and Han Shuo had obtained, as well as the power of the Han family, Akeley was able to make breakthroughs in the Edict of Destruction. Originally, Han Shuo didn't want Akeley to stay in the dangerous Amphilos. However, Akeley insisted on staying in Tanai's Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, saying that the more dangerous a place was, the easier it would be for his mind to reach the state of destruction. "Tell those guys that I can guarantee their safety if all the poisoners join the Han family," Akeley said to an elderly man sitting in front of him. Akeley was lazily lying on a spacious and comfortable leather chair with his legs crossed. He was holding a bunch of sparkling and translucent grapes in his hand. He raised his head and swallowed the grapes as he spoke to an old man in front of him. "Lord Akeley, the people out there are on tenterhooks. Recently, strangers have been appearing in the vicinity of the Amphilos. It seems that the God Hunter Alliance is coming. Not only are they afraid, but so are we. Lord Akeley, shouldn't we lay low for the time being?" asked the elderly man in a bitter smile as he wiped the beads of sweat off his forehead. He was just a pharmacist recruited by Han Shuo back in Ethereal City. Combat was not his forte. Given the current situation, anyone could tell that the Amphilos was no longer safe. Even Han Shuo had told them that they could retreat if the situation worsened. Akeley was the only one who didn't seem to be aware of this situation in the Amphilos. He didn't seem to care about the threat posed by the God Hunter Alliance at all. "What's there to be afraid of?" Akeley spat out the last grape pit and said nonchalantly, "Tell the poisoners outside that Brian of the Han family said that as long as they work for the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, the Han family will guarantee their safety." What guarantee do we have?" The elderly man shook his head. He felt that Akeley must have gone mad. Akeley coldly groaned and said, "The God Hunter Alliance has suffered heavy losses in the pandemonium. All the hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance have fled from Tanai. I believe that they won't be leaving for long. The era of Logue and Tyre is over. From now on, the entire fringe will belong to the Han family. This is something that no one can change." You must be talking nonsense." The elderly man was stunned. He didn't dare to believe Akeley's words. For the past few days, Akeley had been either eating or getting drunk. He had been spouting nonsense like a lunatic. "Idiot, don't you know that the important members of the Han family have spatial mirrors?" Akeley disdainfully rolled his eyes at him. He got up from his chair and walked out on his own, muttering to himself, "I'd better take advantage of this opportunity to force those fellows into submission. Once there's no more danger, those fellows will be hard to talk to again." Chapter 980. Jock was the most famous poisoner in the Amphilos. Some of the poisons he refined were the best in the entire Amphilos. He was famous far and wide in the fields of dissolution and acid. When Jock was young, he was the young master of a large family clan in the Water Dominion. However, he had never been diligent in the field of water energy. Instead, he had indulged in the concoction of various types of potions. During a power change in his family clan, Jock's parents were sacrificed. Jock was hunted down, and only managed to escape from his family clan with great difficulty. Despite the hatred in his heart, Jock managed to survive and secretly return to his family clan. Using an acid poison mist he refined himself, he killed all 600 members of his family clan in one night. Every single one of them was reduced to a puddle of blood. Not a single person was left alive. Prior to that, Jock was a nobody. But as soon as he made his move, he shocked the entire Water Dominion. For a period of time, all the divine guards in the Water Dominion were mobilized. They were determined to capture or kill Jock on the spot. Jock, who was weak in strength and only specialized in refining poisons, had no choice but to disguise himself and travel thousands of miles from the Water Dominion to the Fringe. Along the way, Jock constantly deployed the poisons he refined himself, and killed many of the divine guards who were pursuing him. He became the public enemy of the entire Water Dominion. As for Han Shaw himself, he was caught in the crossfire of his poison while being chased by the divine guards. His left arm had rotted into a pile of bones. If he hadn't reacted in time and decisively severed his left arm, perhaps he would have become a pile of bones by now. Jock was the most wanted criminal in the Water Dominion. The city lords of all the major cities in the Water Dominion had declared that if Jock dared to leave the Fringe, they would kill him at all costs. In the Fringe, Jock could study poisons to his heart's content. Over the years, his attainments in those two fields were unparalleled. Unfortunately, Jock wasn't adept in combat. He had to be stealthy when he deployed his poisons. Once someone got close to him, he would be killed before he had the chance to deploy his poisons. Most of those who had the means to escape had already left the Fringe. But Jock knew that once he left the Fringe, only death would await him. Therefore, he could only defend the Fringe to the death. He could only linger at death's door in Tanai, hoping that he could survive this calamity. No one wanted to die, and Jock was no exception. When he discovered that the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy was the only pharmacy in the entire Amphilos that was still open, Jock naturally turned the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy into a safe haven. He did not care if the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy had any grudges with his poisons or not. From time to time, he would come over to inquire about the war situation in the Fringe. In addition to Jock, there were many other poisons and professionals who were not strong enough but were outstanding in various fields. Because these people couldn't contribute in battle, their bodies were weak, and some of them were crippled, the sovereigns didn't care about them at all, so they left them to fend for themselves. "Young Master Chiao, what should we do?" Another pharmacist, Kohler, who was an expert in applying poisons to weapons, asked Jock worriedly in an empty courtyard outside the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. Jock's beard reached his chest, his hair was disheveled, his clothes were ragged, and his appearance was unkempt. He looked like a middle-aged uncle. However, Jock liked to be addressed as young Master Chiao. He felt that his status was a notch higher than the others. "How would I know?" Jock wore a wooden face. He shot a glance at Kohler, then at the dozens of people who were just as ragged as him. He said in an indifferent tone, "Those sovereigns can't even fend for themselves and they don't have the time to care about us. Only the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy is still open. I hope they can guarantee our safety. Sigh, those people from the God Hunter Alliance are all greedy wolves. They kill people as easily as eating a meal. It is said that they will feel uncomfortable if they don't kill for a day. If they manage the Amphilos, I'm afraid none of us will survive. What should we do?" The other person let out a long sigh, his face full of misery. "Let's wait and see. I hope that the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy can provide us with a safe place to stay. In any case, I don't think we can stay in the Amphilos any longer." Jock lazily leaned on a railing. He was just as worried as the others. However, having been through a lot, he was much calmer than the others. While they were talking, Akeley leisurely walked out of the house while stretching his back. The moment Akeley arrived, the eccentric geniuses from all walks of life who had nowhere else to go to in Tanai were startled. They hastily crowded around Akeley and asked him about the future prospects of the Amphilos and the Fringe. Akeley very much enjoyed the treatment of being the center of attention. He grinned as he looked at those anxious faces. Only when they were about to lose control of themselves did he squint at Jock and said, "Young Master Jock, you're here too? Haha, I remember that you were the one who caused the most trouble not long ago. You said that our Celestial Pearl Pharmacy is a swindler, and that we don't have any real skills." Jock looked rather embarrassed. He rubbed his hands and did not say a word. He had no choice but to admit that he was in a disadvantageous position. Back when the Amphilos was safe, Jock had always been disdainful of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. He felt that the medicines they produced were ordinary, and yet they dared to sell them at high prices. Akeley was secretly delighted to see Jock's embarrassed expression. He coldly groaned and looked around. Tyre retreated without a fight and has not been seen since. Logue suffered a great defeat and suffered heavy casualties. He escaped from the Audiobook. Asora betrayed the Fringe and allied himself with Isaiah. Wasis joined forces with my lord to form the last line of defense and deal a heavy blow to the God Hunter alliance. Although the Fringe is vast, only we, the Han family, can provide you with protection. The moment these words came out, these people were all stunned. The news that Akeley had just received was too shocking for them. Tyre and Logue, two of the most powerful sovereigns in the Fringe, had collapsed at the first blow. It was completely beyond their expectations. Asora's betrayal was an unbearable blow to them. They were on the verge of despair when they heard the news from Akeley. It was at this moment that Akeley dropped a bombshell that Han Shur and Wasis had joined forces to deal a heavy blow to the God Hunter alliance. This news was like a raging inferno that burned away all the despair in their hearts. Although they still had some doubts, they would rather believe that this exciting news was true. Akeley, what are you trying to say? Kohler asked, sensing the hidden meaning in Akeley's words. Akeley chuckled mischievously and said, The sovereigns don't think much of you, but we, the Han family, know that you have extraordinary skills in certain special fields. I can accept you as a member of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy on behalf of the Han family. As long as you become a member of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, the Han family will guarantee your safety. We will never allow the God Hunter Alliance to touch you. They knew very well what this meant. Once they joined the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, they would be bound by the Han family, and would lose all their freedom. They would have to serve the Han family, and would not be able to do as they pleased. In their current situation, their safety could not be guaranteed. The Han family's conditions were indeed harsh. But as long as they could survive, they would have no choice but to accept the harshest conditions. Akeley was not in a hurry. He smilingly looked at the hesitant faces of the elites, and waited for their decision. Akeley did not have to wait for long. After a few seconds of silence, one of the elites answered, I am willing to become a member of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. I have long heard that the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy treats its own people very well. To be able to join the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy and become a member of the Han family is more than what I could ever ask for. As long as someone opened their mouth, everything would become very easy. After that person, more and more people expressed their willingness to join the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy and become a part of the Han family. Even Kohler, after some hesitation, nodded his head and agreed to Akeley's proposal, tying himself to the interests of the Han family. Only Jock, the former young master of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, was still hesitant. Back in the Tanai, the sovereigns had long recognized the usefulness of Jock's poisons. They had even sent their emissaries hoping that Jock would follow them, but Jock politely declined. Perhaps it was because Jock had offended the sovereigns that they did not allow Jock to leave the Fringe with them when the Fringe was in danger. They did not care about Jock's life or death. Jock had his own glory days. Compared to Kohler, it was not as easy for him to give up his identity and become a slave. Therefore, Jock was very hesitant. Young Master Jock, our patriarch has told me that he admires your expertise in the field of poisons. He is very appreciative of your expertise in the field of poisons and said that he would like to discuss it with you. As long as you are willing to come to our Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, you will be in charge of all matters related to poisons in the future. In addition, our patriarch also guarantees that you will be able to recover your broken arm. Akeley finally looked at Jock and said with a beaming smile after everyone agreed. Jock immediately lost his composure when he heard that his arm could be restored. He cried out in surprise. What? Regrowing a severed arm is something that only the gods who are experts in the ultimate essence of life can do. Does your patriarch really have such power? Jock was only good at making poisons. He was very good at harming people but not at healing people. Of course. Our patriarch's attainments in the field of pharmacology far exceed your understanding. As long as you become a member of the Han family, our patriarch has promised that regrowing your arm won't be a difficult task. What do you think, Jock? Ilkley said smilingly. He had grasped Jock's vital point, and was not afraid that Jock would not agree. As expected, after hesitating for a moment, Jock finally nodded and said, All right, let's see what power that Brian has to help me regrow my arm. Jock's agreement meant that the most eccentric geniuses in the Tanai would be serving the Han family. With these people joining the Han family, even without the guidance and support of Han Shuo, the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy would be able to reach the pinnacle of Elysium. Chapter 981. Outside the Amphilos, the two sovereigns of the Fringe, Tyre and Logue, had reunited. Although Logue had suffered heavy losses in the battle at Audiobook, he didn't suffer any serious injuries. Logue was a sinister and ruthless man. During the battle at Audiobook, he had used the smaller factions that had submitted to him to fight at the front lines. In the end, more than half of those factions were killed, allowing Logue to preserve his elite forces. Tyre, on the other hand, was aware of the God Hunter Alliance's every move from Dhaka. He had left the Shrine of Destruction earlier without harming a single member of the God Hunter Alliance. His forces were still intact. Originally, after Logue suffered heavy losses in the Bone-Burying Cave, he was disheartened. He planned to withdraw from the Fringe and head to the Destiny Dominion and the Space Dominion to lie low until the situation in the Fringe stabilized. But before he left the Fringe, he received a message from Tyre. Tyre invited Logue to fight one last time in hopes of reversing the situation in Amphilos. Logue originally didn't want to accept Tyre's invitation as he felt that he wouldn't stand a chance against the God Hunter Alliance. But after hearing Tyre's words, he changed his mind. He gathered his remaining forces and reunited with Tyre, intending to use the entire Amphilos to fight the God Hunter Alliance to the death. The two of them had their subordinates spread the news that Tanai was the wealthiest in the Fringe, and that many shops had divine essences. The sovereign shops even had black crystal coins and ores that could rival an entire nation's wealth. They were trying to lure the God Hunter Alliance to the Fringe. Tyre, are you really confident that you can wipe out all those hegemons in one fell swoop? Logue asked Tyre with a gloomy face on top of a barren mountain. Tyre, who hadn't suffered the slightest blow from the God Hunter Alliance, was in high spirits. He smiled and said, Logue, don't worry. There are 10,000 tons of energy crystal ores buried in Amphilos. They are all the energy I've accumulated over the years. As soon as those hegemons enter Amphilos, I can use the energy towers to detonate the energy crystal ores. All the God Hunters, including the hegemons, will be killed in an instant. Energy crystals were extremely pure energy sources. If 10,000 tons of energy crystals exploded at once, the entire Amphilos would be destroyed in an instant. The power of 10,000 tons of energy crystals was comparable to an all-out attack from an overgod with the quintessence. The so-called hegemons of the God Hunters wouldn't be able to escape from such destructive power. Hearing Tyre's description, Rog cursed 18 generations of Tyre's ancestors in his heart. Tyre had unknowingly buried 10,000 tons of energy crystals in the Amphilos. Rog had no idea when Tyre had done it. Fortunately, he was standing with him and knew about this matter. Otherwise, he might have become his target. There are still some shops and poison masters in Tanai. What do you plan to do? Rog cursed Tyre's viciousness in his heart, but his expression was thoughtful. Tyre smiled and said, Those toxicologists don't know what's good for them. It's only a matter of time before they become the scourge of the Amphilos. Haha, let them join the God Hunter Alliance. Also, we need them as bait. If there isn't a single survivor in Tanai, the God Hunters won't fall for it. I hope you succeed. Rog, of course, wouldn't care about the lives of those people. He smiled and nodded. On the other hand, the hegemons of the God Hunters were crestfallen. After escaping from the pandemonium, they immediately assembled their subordinates in an attempt to leave the Fringe as soon as possible. They no longer dared to harbor any greedy thoughts of encroaching upon the Fringe. The power Han Shuo displayed in Pandemonium was simply too terrifying. He was able to kill Alsora effortlessly. Such power and means were far beyond what they knew. The hegemons of the divine dominions were truly terrified. Other than that, they were also afraid that the overgod of death, Nestet, would suddenly return because they sensed the aura of the quintessence shard of death emanating from Little Skull Han Hao. They had also received the news that Nestet was in the fringe. As soon as they sensed the aura of the quintessence shard of Little Skull Han Hao, they knew that Nestet would definitely return to the fringe and the Han family in pandemonium. The hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance feared death just as much as their subordinates feared them. They were instinctively afraid of an overgod with a quintessence. A single overgod with a quintessence could kill all of them. Therefore, when they guessed that Nestet would return in Han Shuo's terrifying power, they had no choice but to avoid him for the time being. Among them, the one who was the most unwilling to leave was Daka. He had plotted with Tyre for a long time to divide the Fringe and the God Hunter Alliance. He had made too many preparations for this battle, and he knew that he would regret it for the rest of his life if he were to leave just like that. Therefore, when he received news from Tyre, he thought for a moment and decided to hide his encounter in Pandemonium. Instead, he told Tyre that Tanai had won a great victory at Pandemonium, causing the Han family to suffer great losses, and that Han Shuo had escaped. The reason why he told Tyre that was because he understood his younger brother's temperament. If Tyre were to know that Han Shuo's strength had skyrocketed, even if the hegemons of Tanai and Pandemonium were heavily injured, Tyre wouldn't be able to benefit from it. If they were to retreat from the Fringe, Tyre wouldn't stand a chance against such a powerful Han Shuo. Tyre wouldn't do things that harmed others without benefiting himself. However, if the hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were destroyed, Daka would be the one to benefit. He would be able to consolidate the power of the God Hunter Alliance and become its true master. Therefore, for his own sake, Daka decided to lie to his younger brother and not tell him the truth. After discussing with Tyre, Daka ordered his subordinates to spread out and gather information. Very soon, they learned of the situation in Amphalos from some of the fleeing gods. Judas from the Dominion of Light had gone missing, so they naturally believed that he had been killed by Han Shuo. With Judas gone, Daka became the most reputable person in the Fringe. The hegemons gathered together once more, and Daka told them about the treasure Tanai had hidden in Pandemonium. The hegemons, who were already frightened out of their wits, became greedy after hearing Daka's words. Daka struck while the iron was hot, and said that they couldn't return empty-handed. Tempted by the huge amount of black crystal coins, the hegemon decided to head to the Amphalos and plunder all the treasures the sovereigns had accumulated over the years before leaving the Fringe. Before they came to the Fringe, they had heard that Amphalos was a peculiar place where every god had to pay an exorbitant fee to enter. Many of those Fringe dwellers who came from the 12 dominions to the Fringe were people of high status and wealthy family clans. What they had the most in their hands was black crystal coins. Most of them had taken refuge in the Amphalos with black crystal coins. The wealth of the Amphalos was well known throughout the world. With Daka's encouragement, the hegemons who were already frustrated by their trip to the Fringe once again joined forces and marched towards the Amphalos in a grandiose manner. After leaving with Han Shuo, Little Skull Han Hao mobilized his subordinates. Due to the unique God Hunter aura they emanated, they were able to avoid being interrogated and pursued by the God Hunter Alliance at times. There were simply too many God Hunters in the Fringe. The elites of the 12 divine dominions were all gathered in one place. Many of them had been separated from each other during the battles in the major regions. That was why Han Hao's followers were able to take advantage of the situation. They spread out and followed Han Hao's instructions to gather information about the God Hunter Alliance's movements, as well as Log and Tyre's whereabouts. "Chief, we've received news that the God Hunter Alliance is gathering their forces and is planning to head to Amphalos. Rumor has it that the Amphalos contains the accumulated wealth of several sovereigns, as well as a large number of divine essences." Polo stood before Han Hao and reported the latest news to him. Chapter 982 ***** The Pandemonium. Han Shuo spent some time searching for the members of the Han family, and brought them back to the Pandemonium. When the Han family members saw the state of the pandemonium, they were filled with grief and indignation. They hated the god hunters to the bone. The pandemonium was now in a state of devastation. Not a single area was left unscathed. The earth had been torn into long, narrow chasms. Gravel was piled up in many places, making the ground uneven and cratered. The well-proportioned buildings, as well as some stone pillars and energy towers that served both defensive and aesthetic purposes, had all disappeared without a trace. To Phoebe Statholm and the others, the pandemonium was the Han family's true home. They had invested too much in the pandemonium. When they found out that the pandemonium had been completely destroyed, they couldn't help but feel a little sad. It wasn't just them, even Han Sho himself felt a little sad. He had spent far more effort on pandemonium than anyone else. He had spent countless black crystal coins and ores just to set up all sorts of formations. He had also spared no effort in using rare and precious treasures to build the pandemonium. Han Sho had spent a great deal of effort to build the pandemonium. The destruction of the pandemonium was a huge blow to everyone. Don't be sad. I will rebuild this place. With the help of Han Tu, Han Mu, and Han Jin, we will be able to restore the pandemonium to its original state in a year or two. When that time comes, the pandemonium will become a mystical place on Elysium. You will find that the pandemonium is even more perfect and more suitable for you to cultivate your various elemental energies. Han Sho consoled when he saw that Phoebe and the others were in distress. None of them were injured. As soon as the situation took a turn for the worse, Angelina and the 5 elite zombies led them through the mountains and escaped. The Earth Elite Zombie and Metal Elite Zombie were exceptionally talented in this aspect. There was basically no one who could stop them from leaving. Thanks to Han Sho's gentle consolation, the women's mood gradually improved. When they thought about how miraculous Han Jin and Han Tu were, they felt that rebuilding the pandemonium wouldn't be too difficult. Salus and Wasis did not accompany him to the pandemonium. Now that Nestet, Judas, and the goddess of destiny had left the fringe, Han Sho was confident that no one would be able to harm the Han family under his protection. The situation in the Amphilos was still unclear. Han Sho needed Salus and Wasis to figure out the situation first. Han Tu, come over here for a moment. Han Sho gestured to Han Tu, who was thinking about how to rebuild the pandemonium. Han Tu quickly came to his father and asked, Father, should we start rebuilding the pandemonium now? Actually, there aren't many changes to the underground. All we need to do is to mend the cracks and restore the underground palaces to their original state. Then, the underground will be as it was before. You can do that after I leave. I don't think the hegemons would dare to return to the pandemonium. There shouldn't be too much of a problem here, said Han Sho. Han Sho nodded before he took out a sparkling sphere and handed it to Han Tu smilingly. This is Alsora's divine soul. It contains a small portion of Alsora's earth divine energy when he was alive. Refine it, and your strength will skyrocket. Now that you have become an overgod, I believe that rebuilding the pandemonium will be much easier with your talent. As soon as the crystal ball appeared, Han Tu sensed an astonishing amount of earth energy from it. Alsora's divine soul and consciousness had been erased from the crystal ball, leaving behind only the purest comprehension of the energy of earth and some breakthroughs in his realm. To Han Tu, this sphere was a treasure that he could only dream of. With this sphere, he would be able to advance to the next level without any suspense. Han Tu excitedly clasped the sphere that contained Alsora's remnant energy and the Earth's profound energy. Thank you, Father! Thank you, Father! Han Sho turned to look at Han Mu, Han Shui, and the others who were wearing astonished faces. He put on a faint smile and said, Don't be envious. This time, I will join hands with Han Hao to kill the 3 hegemons who cultivate in the energy of water, fire, and life. I will take their divine souls for you. Han Shui, Han Hua, and Han Mu were overjoyed and cheered at the same time. Only Han Jin wore a bitter face. Before he could say anything, Andrina placed her hands on her hips and angrily asked, Brian, what about Little Gold? Han Sho stared blankly for a moment before he put on a bitter smile and said, The energy Little Gold cultivates is a little different from the others. I can't find anyone suitable to help Little Gold advance. Among the 12 hegemons, the energy they cultivate isn't that obscure. There's nothing I can do. Andrina, Father treats all of us equally. You know how powerful I am. I won't be able to advance overnight. Han Jin took the initiative to defend Han Shuo. The energy of metal that Han Jin cultivated in was extremely rare in this universe. Even the few he encountered were not as strong as him and were of little help to him. Andrina only stopped after hearing Han Jin's words. She glared at Han Jin and softly said, "You are the most honest one. You keep everything for them but don't use it for yourself." Han Jin let out a hollow laugh. He appeared to be somewhat afraid of Andrina. Han Shuo found the conversation between Han Jin and Andrina to be very interesting. He did not expect that Little Gold would be the fastest to find a perfect love. Over the past few days, Han Shuo had been observing Han Jin and Andrina. Andrina nodded and said, "The power of the God of Destiny is in my mother's body, but it was sealed. My mother's divine soul was reincarnated. Before her power of destiny was awakened, she didn't know who she was. But at that time, my mother could vaguely sense what would happen in the future. Unfortunately, because she wasn't strong enough, she couldn't avoid it even if she could sense it." Han Shuo was astonished. He didn't expect that the goddess of destiny would have such an old story. If not for Andrina, Han Shuo would never have known about it. The power of the goddess of destiny was very special. The other 11 quintessence overgods all respected her very much. Who could have sealed such a powerful god and made her reincarnate? Vaguely, Han Shuo seemed to have grasped something. "Angelina, with your mother's power, she should have avenged you a long time ago, right?" Han Jin couldn't help but ask. It was the first time Angelina had mentioned this. "That's right. But she didn't kill all the god hunters. She clearly has the power to do so." Humph. Every time I asked her why she didn't kill all the god hunters, she would remain silent. "I don't know what could be more important than avenging my father," said Andrina resentfully. It seemed that this was the reason why she had run away from home many times. She still held a grudge against the goddess of destiny. "All right, come with me to the Amphilas," said Han Shuo suddenly. "Father, can I go with Andrina?" Han Jin stared blankly for a moment before he looked at his father with a pleading look. Han Shuo couldn't help but laugh. It seems that Han Jin has fallen for it. He nodded and said, "All right, you go with Andrina. We will go to the Amphilas." Chapter 983. The Amphilas was shrouded in an unprecedented gloomy haze. Frigid winds blew past. Everyone in Tanai felt a chill, not from their bodies, but from the depths of their souls. There were often unfamiliar figures loitering outside the Amphilas. Those strangers with sinister gazes and chilling auras were obviously god hunters. The sovereigns of the fringe were constantly retreating. Everyone in Tanai was deeply worried about their fates. They believed that once the God Hunter Alliance descended upon the Amphilas, not a single person in Tanai would be left alive. Tanai was in a constant state of chaos. God Hunters were roaming everywhere. If they left the Amphilas now, they would only die even faster. To those in Tanai, they were at their wits' end. They could only passively await their final judgment. There was nothing else they could do. Unknowingly, such emotions had spread throughout the entire Amphilas. Their gazes were dull and lifeless. The only exception was the celestial pro-pharmacy. Those poisoners whom Akeley had confidently roped into the celestial pro-pharmacy still had a glimmer of hope in their hearts. It was precisely because of this glimmer of hope that they joined the celestial pro-pharmacy without any hesitation and handed over the fruits of their labor in various fields to the celestial pro-pharmacy. To these people, the crystallization of their many years of specialized research was more important than their own lives. Although Akeley had confidently guaranteed that nothing would happen to them, they were not 100% convinced. Therefore, they chose to hand over the fruits of their labor to the celestial pearl pharmacy for safekeeping. To them, they could die, but they absolutely could not allow the fruits of their labor to disappear along with their lives. If it were any other time, they definitely wouldn't hand over those fruits to the Han family or to Akeley. But now, the shadow of death loomed over them. With every passing day, they felt that they were one step closer to death. Under this unbearable pressure, they finally gave in to death. Akeley, of course, was overjoyed. With so many fruits of their labor, even if those poisoners were to perish, the Han family would be able to build on their foundation and make the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy the one and only pharmacy on Elysium. Therefore, Akeley happily accepted their fruits of labor and assigned his men to protect them. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. Gradually, the people in the Amphilos noticed that the god hunters outside the Amphilos were appearing more and more frequently. They suddenly realized that something was amiss. They were terrified and hopelessly waiting for their fates to be judged. Indeed, the army of the God Hunter Alliance had finally arrived at the Amphilos. As the leader of the operation, Daka had been feeding the hegemons the riches of the Amphilos. The hegemons didn't suspect anything and gathered outside the Amphilos with the intention of making a fortune before leaving. Under Daka's arrangements, the god hunters were prepared to attack Amphilos in one fell swoop and plunder all its riches. On the same day, Little Skull Han Hao received a message from Polo and learned where Logue and Tyre were hiding. Han Hao wasn't in a hurry to settle the score with Tyre and Logue because the Amphilos was currently in a much more dangerous situation. He knew that there were still members of the House of Han in the Amphilos, and he also knew that there were still many toxicologists in the Amphilos. He also knew that those toxicologists had joined the House of Han based on Akeley's information. "My lord, we shouldn't go to Amphilos at this time. All the hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance are already in Tanai. If we enter Amphilos now, we will have to face all the hegemons. Given our strength, I'm afraid that we won't be able to withstand the attacks of those hegemons," Polo respectfully advised with his body hunched. If it weren't for the fact that Han Hao's decision didn't have the slightest chance of victory, Polo wouldn't have dared to question Han Hao's decision. However, it was clear that Han Hao's decision had no chance of victory. Going against the entire God Hunter Alliance with their strength was akin to throwing an egg against a rock. "It'll be fine," Han Hao didn't explain. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Not all of us are going. Just you and your group will be following me. We aren't going to Amphilos to fight the God Hunter Alliance, but to rescue those who have joined the Han family." Polo's face turned even more bitter when he heard that Han Hao wasn't going to go all out. Although he was cursing Han Hao's decision in his heart, he didn't dare to say anything. He just nodded and said, "All right then, I'll do as you say, my lord." Polo didn't say anything else. He gathered his elites and got ready to cooperate with Han Hao. On the other side, Tyre and Logue were rubbing their fists in excitement. Logue didn't expect that Tyre's plan would actually work. He didn't know that Tyre and Daka, the current leader of the God Hunter Alliance, were brothers. When he learned that the God Hunter Alliance was gathering at Amphilos as Daka had said, he immediately realized that this was an important battle that could turn the tables on the fringe. "Logue, have your men get ready. Once all the hegemons enter Amphilos, I will trigger Tanai's trap. When that happens, all the hegemons won't be able to escape death. The two of us will lead our men outside and get rid of the small fries. After that, we will go into Amphilos to clean up the mess." Tyre smiled faintly and shot a glance at Logue, who was suppressing the excitement in his heart. He thought to himself, "Once those hegemons are dead, my elder brother and I will get rid of you. By then, the entire fringe will be mine." "Don't worry, I have everything prepared." Tyre, you really have a way. I really don't know when you buried the energy crystals underground. After this battle, the God Hunter Alliance will no longer be a threat to us. Your position in the fringe will be unrivaled," Logue said with a smile. Tyre didn't show the slightest bit of arrogance on his face. He even said humbly, "From now on, you and I will take care of the fringe together. We'll use Amphilos as the boundary." Haha, Without your help, I won't be able to accomplish many things. I'll be counting on you in the future. You're too kind, Logue replied even more humbly. In his heart, he was sneering. He thought, once the God Hunter alliance is destroyed and the situation in the fringe stabilizes, you'll probably attack me right away, won't you? With that thought in mind, Logue couldn't help but think about how he should preserve his strength, and how he should deal with Tyre if he were to turn on him. Judging from the current situation, Tyre was clearly stronger than him. He knew Tyre's temperament, and had no choice but to prepare himself as soon as possible. And Tyre really did have other intentions. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to take care of Logue, he wouldn't have called Logue over to help him. To deal with the God Hunters, he and Daka would be the ones to plan and plan. It wouldn't be a problem even without Logue's participation. The God Hunter alliance wasn't as gullible as Tyre thought they would be. No matter how much Daka emphasized the wealth and weak defenses of Amphalos, having suffered greatly at the hands of the Han family in Pandemonium, they were still very cautious. This was especially true for Acer, who was heavily injured by the Han family. When he told the other hegemons about his experiences, they became even more cautious. They didn't enter Amphalos together, as Daka had expected. Instead, they sent some of their subordinates to scout the area first. They would only enter after ascertaining the situation in Amphalos and making sure that there weren't any powerful enemies. There was nothing Daka could do about that. He could only use the magical mirror in his sleeve to communicate with Tyre and ask him to put in some effort. Tyre had long thought of this possibility, and immediately sent a message to Tyre to plunder the Sovereign King's shops. In order to fool the God Hunters, Tyre spared no expense in making proper arrangements. He really did place enough black crystal coins in those Sovereign King's shops that would make anyone's eyes red with envy. All these years, Tyre had earned enough black crystal coins in Amphalos. In order to truly take over the fringe, Tyre had done his best. The reason for doing so was to prevent the hegemons from entering the Amphalos from discovering that there was nothing in the Amphalos. If the hegemons discovered that there was nothing in the Amphalos, Han Shaw wouldn't be able to kill them all. After receiving Tyre's message, Daka confidently ordered his subordinates to follow him. Knowing Tanai's situation, Daka took the lead and ordered the hegemons to be less worried. However, they still didn't dare to trust Daka completely. So, they sent their subordinates into Amphalos to scout the situation. If the rumors were true that Tanai was hiding a huge amount of wealth, they would be the first to enter and plunder it. Daka smirked inwardly as he led his men and the hegemon's subordinates into the Amphalos. Seeing that the God Hunters had really entered Amphalos, Tanai's gods who had nowhere else to go fled. Daka, of course, didn't care if they lived or died. At his signal, the God Hunter subordinates of the hegemons attacked and killed anyone they saw. Those who had nowhere else to go weren't particularly powerful. Otherwise, they wouldn't have stayed in Tanai's Amphalos. There was no way they could survive a massacre by the God Hunters. Those who knew that the only sovereign shop, the Celestial Pro Pharmacy, hadn't closed down yet were fleeing for their lives. From their point of view, the Celestial Pro Pharmacy was the only place that was slightly safer. Their actions quickly attracted the attention of the God Hunter Alliance. Even without Daka's orders, a portion of the God Hunters laughed and followed them, gradually approaching the Celestial Pro Pharmacy. Having slaughtered Tanai's people like slaughtering chickens, the God Hunters no longer believed that Tanai had any powerful enemies. They were extremely arrogant as they advanced. Their ear-piercing screeches echoed in the streets as they got closer and closer to the Celestial Pro Pharmacy. Chapter 984. Seeing that their lives were in danger and that the God Hunters were getting closer and closer, those Celestial Pro Pharmacists panicked. They shouted for Akeley everywhere, hoping that he would fulfill his promise. "Don't worry, they won't die." Akeley popped out of nowhere with a leisurely look on his face. It was as though he didn't know how dangerous the situation was. Standing beside Akeley was Little Skull, Han Hao. His purple demon eye merely glanced at those panic-stricken poison pharmacists. Those poison pharmacists shivered and kept quiet out of fear, not daring to move an inch. Han Hao's notoriety had long been known throughout the fringe. These pharmacists from major pharmacies were especially fearful of Han Hao. Han Hao was already infamous in the past. Now Han Hao, who possessed the quintessence but had yet to conceal its energy, was constantly emanating a terrifying aura. Even a late-stage high god like Polo would feel nervous before the current Han Hao, let alone these lowly pharmacists. When Han Hao swept his gaze across them, all of them turned silent. While they were afraid of Han Hao, they were secretly delighted. At this moment, the presence of a ferocious god like Han Hao seemed to have greatly increased their chances of survival. "Bring them in." Han Hao nodded and instructed Akeley after seeing that those people had quieted down. Akeley might not have any misgivings in front of Han Shuo, but in front of Little Skull, Han Hao, who was as cold and unfeeling as an iceberg, even Akeley felt rather awkward. Under Han Hao's command, Akeley raised his voice and said, "Follow me. Let's go in." Back when Earth Elite Zombie and the others were in the Celestial Pro Pharmacy, they had conveniently opened up a large underground space to serve as the Celestial Pro Pharmacy's secret warehouse and chambers. There was even a passageway that led directly from the Celestial Pro Pharmacy to the outside of the Omphalos. Little Skull had used that passageway to sneak into the fringe. The nervous poison makers hastily and cautiously bypassed Han Hao and headed toward Akeley. Behind Akeley was Polo, who was brought here by Han Hao. He stepped aside and allowed the pharmacists to enter. Before all the pharmacists could enter the Celestial Pro Pharmacy, a series of ear-piercing shrieks could be heard coming from outside. Shadows were converging from all directions. Han Hao's face seemed to always be indifferent. Seeing that there were still a few poisoned pharmacists who hadn't entered yet, he didn't wait any longer. He nodded to Polo and signaled for Polo and Akeley to take care of those incompetent poisoned pharmacists. "Haha, brothers, this is the Celestial Pro Pharmacy. The Celestial Pro Pharmacy has branches in many cities on Elysium. I'm sure you have all heard of the miraculous effects of the Celestial Pro Pharmacy, right?" Hee. Compared to those black crystal coins, the treasures of the Celestial Pro Pharmacy are priceless. "We are really lucky." "Balro, the Celestial Pro Pharmacy belongs to the Han family in the Pandemonium. Should we give up on this place? The House of Han is no ordinary place. Even the hegemons of the Pandemonium suffered a great loss there," said another uneasy voice. This person seemed to know a thing or two about what happened in the Pandemonium, and was clearly not confident in his words. After the battle in the Pandemonium, only a small number of god hunters actually entered Tanai. Most of the hegemon's subordinates were outside the Pandemonium. Therefore, apart from the hegemons themselves, not many knew about the battle in the Pandemonium. What's there to be afraid of? Even if the hegemons suffered a little loss in the Pandemonium, that's nothing. Let's not talk about whether the Celestial Pro Pharmacy has experts guarding it. Even if they do, we have so many people on our side. The person called Baylor coldly snorted. As soon as he finished speaking, a bang was heard as he broke through the door and entered. Whoosh! A gigantic bone flower of death bloomed in front of the door. Like a monster from the abyss, the bone flower of death waved its bone spikes and grabbed Balro, who was the first to enter. In just an instant, Balro was torn to shreds. Not a single one of the god hunters who entered the Pandemonium with him could escape from the bone flower of death. The blossoming bone flower of death continued to expand and emanate a bizarre energy from the center of the flower. Under the influence of that energy, all the god hunters felt powerless. It was as though their divine souls were being suppressed. The immobilized god hunters were pierced through by the bone spikes and shredded into pieces by the bone flowers. Their scarlet blood drenched the bone flowers, making them look even more demonic and radiant. They gave off an extremely sinister feeling. "Get lost!" shouted Han Hao coldly. He slowly walked out of the Celestial Pro Pharmacy with the bone spikes in his hand. The bone flower of death spun even faster as soon as he appeared. The bone spikes that should have been as hard as steel were now as flexible as ropes. They could even extend in all directions at will. A few of the stunned god hunters were pulled into the flower before they could even escape. Their divine bodies were mangled by the bone spurs, and even their divine souls were pulled into the center of the flower bud by a mysterious force. They died on the spot. "It's him! It's that guy!" cried one of the god hunters as he hastily retreated. Han Hao's image was deeply ingrained in their hearts. Many of the god hunters knew who he was. Among them were some of Dagmar's subordinates. They were originally from the Death Dominion and naturally recognized Han Hao, who had been throwing his weight around in the Death Dominion for many years. "Han Hao, as a fellow god hunter, why are you helping an outsider?" shouted one of the former god hunters in the Death Dominion. He did not immediately retreat. Instead, he glared at Han Hao and shouted angrily. This was a god hunter with an extremely muscular body that gave off a sinister aura. Back in the Death Dominion, he had worked together with Han Hao under Dagmar's orders. Back then, he had even helped Han Hao. That was why he reprimanded Han Hao when he saw Han Hao going on a killing spree. Han Hao stared blankly for a moment as though he did not expect to run into such an acquaintance in Tanai. The light in Violet Demon's eyes flickered for a moment. After pondering for a moment, he slowly said, "Dagmar and the others are not qualified to rule over the god hunters. The current hegemons are all mediocre. Only I will be the true leader of the god hunters in the future." This incomparably arrogant sentence was spoken as if it was the truth of the universe, the ultimate profound meaning of the laws. It was as though he should have been the hegemon from the start, and should have taken over the position long ago. "How arrogant! Lord Dagmar will not let you get away with this!" shouted the god hunter furiously. "Dagmar is dead. I killed him with my own hands." Han Hao coldly glanced at the god hunter and said, "Leave. I won't kill you. Once all the hegemons are done for, you will understand the situation and submit to me." As soon as those words left his mouth, an enormous bone throne suddenly appeared and hovered behind Han Hao. Han Hao sat on the enormous bone throne and looked down at the god hunters beneath him like an emperor looking down on the world. That domineering aura was deeply imprinted in their souls. The moment the throne of bones appeared, the god hunter immediately knew that Han Hao wasn't lying. As the symbol of Dagmar's identity, the fact that it appeared on Han Hao's body meant that Dagmar's life was in danger. They felt a chill in their hearts. Dagmar's valiant and invincible strength had made them lose all will to resist. Now that Han Hao had killed Dagmar, they simply couldn't believe it. Han Hao didn't say much to the god hunter. Instead, with a jolt of his quintessence, the enormous bone flower moved once more. Its soft, rope-like bone spikes wrapped around the dumbfounded old friend and flung him outside. "Scram!" shouted Han Hao coldly. This time, no one dared to linger. They hurriedly fled back the way they came. Only the god hunter who had once worked with Han Hao looked at Han Hao with an odd expression. After a long while, he nodded hatefully and said, "If you can really control the entire God Hunter Alliance, I will prostrate myself at your feet." Han Hao wore an indifferent face. He nodded and said, "Go. Leave the Amphalos as far as you can." The God Hunter stared blankly for a moment, but did not say anything. He turned around and left Han Hao's side. "My lord, we should leave as soon as possible. It won't be easy for us to escape once those hegemons gather here." At this moment, Polo walked out from inside and respectfully bowed to Han Hao before persuading him. "Don't worry about it. You guys just keep an eye on those poison makers. I'm not leaving yet." Han Hao didn't even turn his head. He could sense that Han Shuo was on his way and would reach the Amphalos in no time. Han Hao, who possessed the quintessence, and Han Shuo, who had greatly improved his strength, had become closer and closer to each other. The two could communicate with each other through their souls without the use of magical mirrors. "Very well. Be careful, my lord." Polo did not insist. He bowed again before he quietly left. It was at this moment that loud cheers could be heard coming from every corner of the Amphalos. It was obvious that those cheers were from the God Hunters. Han Hao wore a puzzled look. Using the demon generals he released from his bone spear, he discovered that the god hunters had indeed found a huge amount of black crystal coins in the sovereign shops. It was the appearance of these black crystal coins that caused the god hunters to be so excited and cheered loudly. Outside the Omphalos, the hegemons who had been hesitant to enter the Omphalos were overjoyed when they heard the cheers coming from all around Tanai. The hegemons looked at each other and saw the greed in each other's eyes. They no longer doubted Daka's words. They immediately ordered their subordinates to enter the Omphalos and led the way themselves. It was at this moment that Han Shuo, Han Jin, and Andrina approached the Omphalos. Before they reached the Omphalos, Han Jin's face suddenly changed. He shouted, "Not good." Chapter 985. Before they reached the Omphalos, Han Jin suddenly shouted. Han Shuo jumped and asked with a frown, "What's wrong?" Han Jin looked rather flustered. He anxiously replied, "There are a lot of energy crystals hidden in the Omphalos. I didn't discover them the last time I was here. Those energy crystals are used in energy crystal cannons. They are extremely explosive." "What does that mean?" Han Shuo put on a solemn face and began to take the matter seriously. "It means that if the energy crystals explode, the entire Omphalos will be razed to the ground in an instant. Heavens, if so many energy crystals were to explode at the same time, I don't know who would be able to escape alive." Han Jin put on an anxious face and cried out, "Is Big Brother still in the Omphalos?" "Oh no, he must leave the Omphalos immediately. Otherwise, even Big Brother will be in danger. That kind of explosive energy can even affect Overgod experts?" Han Shuo's pupils constricted as he suddenly thought of a possibility. Could it be a fatal blow aimed at the god hunter hegemon? "I think even an Overgod wouldn't be able to escape death from such a terrifying explosion," said Han Jin anxiously. Han Shuo's face turned pale when he heard those words. He immediately contacted the little skull, Han Hao, and informed Han Hao about Tanai's abnormality in the Omphalos, telling him to leave the Omphalos through the underground tunnel at all costs. "Han Jin, is there any way to stop the energy crystals from exploding?" Han Shuo's face was dark and his tone was equally anxious. The Omphalos did not agree with the pandemonium. It was the heart of the fringe. Not only were there all kinds of shops, but there were also many gods residing there. To Han Shuo, the existence of the Omphalos was very necessary. He did not wish for the Omphalos to be destroyed. Not only are there energy crystals in the underground tunnel, but there are also many black crystal coins in Tanai's shops. Black crystal coins are a special kind of energy crystal of even higher purity. If the Omphalos were to explode, those black crystal coins would amplify the explosion. I'm afraid that all living beings in the Omphalos will be annihilated overnight." Andrina pondered for a moment, and said softly. After taking a short pause, Andrina's eyes burst with killing intent. She sneered and said, "Brian, don't you think it's a good idea to destroy those god hunters?" In an instant, they all died. "What a wonderful thing!" Andrina hated the god hunters. To her, the Omphalos was insignificant. It would be wonderful if she could get rid of all the god hunters at the cost of the Omphalos. Naturally, Han Shuo would not do that. First of all, the Omphalos was very important. Second, the hegemons who cultivated in the energy of water, fire, and life were his targets. He needed Tukamor and the others to help Han Shui, Han Hua, and Han Mu advance their cultivation. Furthermore, some of those god hunters could become Han Hao's subordinates in the future. If all the god hunter experts were to die overnight, even if Han Hao took over the god hunter alliance, it would be pointless. "There is a way." Han Jin stole a glance at Andrina and whispered, "If Andrina is willing to help me, we should be able to stop the energy crystals from exploding." Andrina was a special life form that had amazing control over energy crystals. With her power and Han Jin's help, it was indeed possible to stop the energy crystals from exploding. "Little gold!" Andrina glared at Han Jin and hatefully said, "You won't help me." Han Jin put on an embarrassed smile and rubbed his hands as though he was a little afraid of Andrina. After hesitating for a moment, Han Jin's eyes suddenly lit up and he said, "There are a lot of energy crystals underground. If you can control the situation, you can use those energy crystals to improve your strength." Andrina's eyes suddenly blossomed with radiance. She giggled and looked at Han Sha in a proud manner. She said, "Brian, if you promise to give me all the energy crystals underground, I will help you. Take it, take it." There was no time for hesitation. Compared to the energy crystals, Han Sha was more concerned about other benefits. Especially when the little skull was still in Tanai. Although he was a little sad that so many energy crystals had become Andrina's snacks, there was nothing he could do about it. "All right, let's go, little gold. We will cut off all the energy fluctuations from the outside," said Andrina cheerfully. She pulled Han Jin and excitedly walked towards the Amphilos. Outside the Amphilos, Tyre and Logue had sinister smiles plastered on their faces. All of their subordinates were fully equipped and ready to go. "Logue, let's go!" "Haha, don't worry. As long as I use my divine soul, the Amphilos will be razed to the ground. We are still some distance away from the Amphilos. In order to maximize our harvest, we should make a move first." Tyre couldn't help but feel proud of himself. He couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart when he thought about how he was the one who turned the Fringe's losing battle around overnight. No matter how strong one's mental fortitude was, they would lose their composure in the face of the greatest accomplishment of their lives. Tyre was no exception. Logue was all smiles and seemed even happier than Tyre. He said, "Everything is ready. Let's go. The Amphilos will be ours very soon." The two looked at each other and laughed heartily. They finally dispelled the concealment boundary and led their subordinates out into the Amphilos. At this moment, the Amphilos was in an abyss of suffering. Other than Daka, who had arrived earlier, more God Hunter hegemons had arrived. Their subordinates were scattered all around Tonai, killing and plundering anyone and everything they saw. The sovereign king shops of the few sovereigns in the valley became their main targets. The few commanders each took a side and rushed towards the sovereign king shops that they had already scouted out, carrying out the last plunder before they left. Most of the gods who had yet to leave Tanai were killed. They were powerless against the savage god hunters and were either slaughtered in their own shops or in secret chambers. Daka was secretly delighted to see that all the hegemons had fallen for the trap. The other hegemons were crazily plundering the sovereign shops and didn't pay attention to Daka's actions. "All of you, split up and leave the Amphilos from different entrances. Remember, hurry!" Daka ordered after gathering his subordinates. "Why? My lord, shouldn't we be like them and take everything for ourselves? If we're too late, it will all belong to someone else." One of Daka's subordinates asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Daka coldly snorted and said, "You'll have to be alive to bring it out." Daka scanned his subordinates' faces with a gloomy expression and shouted, "Have all of your men leave the Amphilos immediately! Don't ask so many questions!" Daka had built up his authority in front of his subordinates for a long time. None of them dared to say anything when they saw him getting angry. They quickly obeyed his orders and quietly retreated from the city gates. Daka's actions didn't alarm anyone else. The god hunters were so immersed in the joy of plundering that they forgot everything else and carried on with their work. At this moment, their vigilance was at its lowest, and they had no idea what was happening around them. Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. After Little Skull Han Hao received Han Shou's message, he immediately dove into the underground tunnel. Trusting Han Shou, Little Skull knew that the Amphilos could explode at any moment. It didn't take long for Han Hao to catch up to Polo, Akeley, and the others. Seeing that they didn't seem to be in a hurry, Han Hao urged, "Hurry up, as fast as you can." Seeing that Han Hao had suddenly caught up to them and had lost his usual composure, Polo, Akeley, and the others realized that something was amiss. They didn't ask too many questions and hurriedly dragged the poisoners away. Suddenly, Han Hao thought of something and hurriedly transmitted to Han Shou. "It must be Tyre and Logue's doing. Apart from the few sovereigns, No one else had the power or authority to bury so many energy crystals underground without making a sound. Father, I've already located them. They're at, don't say any more. I know where they are. Hansho interrupted Little Skull's transmission. On the other side, Hansho's consciousness had already sensed a new group of people approaching. With Hansho's powerful consciousness, he could instantly recognize Tyre and Logue's auras even though they were thousands of miles apart. Currently, Han Jin and Andrina were heading towards the Amphilas. As these two were extremely special lifeforms, even if the Amphilas were to explode, Han Jin and Andrina would still be safe and sound. Their lifeforms and body structures were mutually attracted to the energy crystals. From Han Shuo's point of view, even if the Amphilas were to explode, the two would only benefit from it. Therefore, Han Shuo was relieved of the burden in his heart, and wasn't particularly worried. In a flash, Han Shuo rapidly approached Tyre and Logue while continuing to communicate with Han Hao. Goldie and Andrina are heading towards the Amphilas. They will stop the explosion at Tanai. However, you two still have to leave as fast as you can. I don't know when Tyre and Logue will trigger the explosion at Tanai. Father, Tyre and Logue are planning to deal with all the hegemons. Once Andrina and Goldie have taken control of the Amphilas, inform me immediately. I will also take some men to block all the exits and settle the scores with those who destroyed the pandemonium. Transmitted Little Skull. Got it. I'll head over to Tyre and Logue first and take care of them, replied Han Shuo. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived at Tyre and Logue's location. Han Shuo did not show himself immediately. He was afraid that his appearance would cause Tyre and Logue to panic and trigger the explosion of the energy crystals in the Amphilas. Han Shuo waited for a while. When he sensed that Little Skull had left the Amphilas and Andrina and Han Jin had arrived, he suddenly appeared in the middle of Tyre and Logue's party. Chapter 986. Han Shuo's sudden appearance in the middle of Tyre and Logue's troops startled the two sovereigns who were advancing at high speed. As the setting sun shone, a chilling aura spread from the Amphilas all the way here. The subordinates of the two sovereigns suddenly realized that there was an extra person on top of their group. They were stunned for a moment before they shouted in alarm. You, who are you? Not all of Tyre and Logue's subordinates recognized Han Shuo. Most of these so-called elites were left behind by the two sovereigns in the Shrine of Destruction and Audiobook. They spent most of their time quietly cultivating and guarding the shrine and Audiobook. They rarely appeared in the fringe. Tyre, Logue, come and see me! Han Shuo suddenly smiled and shouted as he looked down from above. Tyre and Logue, who were at the front and the back, were rather puzzled when they heard Han Shuo's thunderous voice. They had no idea why Han Shuo would appear at such a crucial moment. This had obviously disrupted their plans, causing their expressions to change slightly. Especially Tell, there was a faint feeling in his heart that something was wrong. He thought about it carefully and recalled the details of every step of the operation in his mind. After Tell was sure that every step he took was accurate, he let out a sigh of relief. A warm smile suddenly appeared on his face, and he walked past his men to the back. A series of thoughts flashed through Tyre's mind as he quickly thought of a way to deal with Han Shuo. When Tyre appeared in front of Han Shuo, he discovered that Logue, who was at the back of the group, had already arrived before him. At this moment, Logue was laughing and chatting with Han Shuo about something. Tyre was relieved. He felt that Han Shuo should know nothing about his actions. Brian, I heard that you suffered a great defeat in the pandemonium. Sigh, the two of us couldn't even protect ourselves and couldn't help you in time. We are truly sorry, said Tyre after he arrived. He pretended to be sad and said, We have underestimated the power of the God Hunter Alliance. We did not expect that the entire fringe would be pushed back so quickly. We haven't received any good news yet. Brian, it seems that we won't be able to hold the fringe for much longer. Han Shuo was rather surprised. He thought that the news of his victory in the pandemonium hadn't been kept a secret. Tyre and Daka were brothers and had a special way of communicating with each other. Why would he think that the pandemonium had suffered a great defeat? After staring blankly for a moment, Han Shuo's lips curled into a smirk. He realized that Daka must have deliberately concealed the truth so that Tyre could help him eliminate the hegemons. In order to buy more time for Goldie and Andrina, Han Shuo didn't rush to attack. Instead, he sighed and said, "Pandemonium was reduced to ruins overnight. Nearly 1,000 of my Tanai guards were killed. There was nothing I could do against the hegemons. All I could do was watch as they were slaughtered. All I could do was protect myself." Han Shuo's anger suddenly flared up. He glared at Tyre and shouted, "Why did Belinton and Cuz come to the pandemonium? Why did Judas and Tuckamore come too? Why didn't the two of you stop them?" After a moment of hesitation, Han Hao suddenly roared, "Tyre, your subordinates didn't suffer any casualties. Belinton and Cuz didn't lose any of their men either. You didn't fight them at all. Why didn't you come to the pandemonium to save us? Before the battle, you said that we should help each other. What did you do?" Han Hao's voice became more and more agitated and indignant, as if he was about to start a fight at any moment. On Tyre and Rog's side, they weren't the only core subordinates. On the periphery, there were also the leaders of various factions. They had temporarily joined Tyre and Log's side with their subordinates before the battle. These people weren't completely loyal to Tyre and Log. Han Shuo's words were mainly for them to hear. As expected, after Han Shuo's righteous rebuke, the leaders of various factions who were temporarily under Tyre and Log turned their suspicious gazes to Tyre and Log. "We didn't fight Belinton and Cuz's men," one of the leaders of a major faction called Garp, who had been with Tyre all along, suddenly said after Han Shuo's speech. "Also, during the battle at Audiobook, those who died were all outsiders like us." Another leader of a major faction called Slank hesitated for a moment when he saw a powerful figure like Han Shuo leading the charge against the two of them. He suddenly straightened his back and glared at Log before saying what he had been suppressing for a long time. "Lord Log, you've been sacrificing our subordinates as cannon fodder all along. Out of my 193 brothers, only 75 are still alive. Nearly 2/3 of them are dead. Anthy, Chilu, and the others were almost completely wiped out. All of them were wiped out. What about you? Most of your trusted subordinates are safe. You used our lives to protect your own interests. Log, what did you say when you invited us to follow you? You said that you would treat us equally and that you would do your best to protect our lives. But what did you do? What did you do?" Slank's speech was even more impassioned than Han Shuo's, more spirited, and more righteous. After all, Han Hao was only pretending to be angry while Slank was venting his anger. Slank's words were filled with his boundless resentment towards his dead brothers. "Slank, your men suffered heavy casualties because they weren't strong enough," Slank said with a smile. Log's smiling face gradually turned cold. "Every one of my men is an elite. Their overall strength far surpasses yours, so it's normal for them to suffer so few casualties." Slank, are you planning to betray us now?" When he said the word us, Log shot a glance at Tyre, hinting that they should get rid of Han Shuo as soon as possible. At the very least, they should chase Han Shuo out of the area lest Han Shuo's presence spoil their plans. Before Han Shuo's arrival, the leaders who were dissatisfied with Tyre and Log didn't dare to say anything. Without an overgod to back them up, they wouldn't even dare to resist. Han Shuo's arrival stirred up their hatred for Tyre and Log, causing their morale to waver. Tyre was starting to get anxious. He had already contacted Daka in Amphalos, and knew that Daka's men would soon leave Amphalos. The God Hunter hegemons would also be entering Amphalos one after another. At this moment, he had to keep the leaders of the various forces obedient so that they could deal with the upcoming situation. Although most of the God Hunter hegemons were in Tanai, there were still quite a few who remained outside Amphalos. The number of God Hunters added up was no less than the number of his and Log's subordinates. Once a chaotic battle broke out, it wouldn't be easy to stabilize the situation without the cooperation of the other major factions. Things were still manageable before, But now that Han Sho had joined the fray, the situation became even more complicated. In order to resolve the matter as soon as possible, Tyre hesitated for a moment before he suddenly shouted, "Why are you still trying to sow discord at a time like this? Amphalos' survival is at stake. What are you up to?" Han Sho raised his head to the sky and laughed. His laughter was filled with endless resentment and sorrow. He pointed at Tyre and said, "Tyre, oh Tyre. You dare to do something but don't dare to admit it. Do you think you're worthy of being the first sovereign of the Fringe? You see your subordinates as cannon fodder, and use them as shields in every battle. Ha! You're willing to sacrifice your allies for your own sake. You know that Pandemonium is facing a crisis of life and death, but you turn a blind eye to it. Given your way of doing things, it would be strange if the Fringe didn't perish." After hearing Han Sho's words, the leaders of the major factions looked worried and hesitated. It seemed as though they didn't want to continue fighting with Tyre and Log. Han Sho's words had hit the nail on the head. Tyre and Log's temperament was clear. Two leaders who didn't care about their subordinates' lives would only lead them into the abyss of death. "Brian, Pandemonium is finished. We know that you are very sad. But if you continue to try to sow discord between us with your alarmist words, don't blame me for not showing you any mercy." Tyre took a deep breath. Tel took a deep breath, and his voice suddenly softened. However, anyone could see that this was Tel's last warning before he made his move. "Not showing mercy?" Han Sho burst into laughter before he suddenly shouted, "When have you ever shown mercy?" Nearly 1,000 of our brothers died in the valley, and you are the main culprits. Without Belinton, Cause, Tuckamore, and Judas, Pandemonium might still be able to hold on. It's you! It's your incompetence. You caused the deaths of our brothers. You've gone mad!" Tyre shouted coldly. Without hesitation, he suddenly soared into the sky. His energy of destruction condensed into a spear and shot at Han Sho. The moment the spear appeared, a murderous aura enveloped the entire sky. The spear tip seemed to be able to destroy everything in its path. Tiny cracks appeared on both sides of the spear tip, and within those cracks, there were strange and mysterious colors. As soon as Tyre moved, Log floated out like a specter. His attack was different from Tyre's. The energy of death condensed into a giant python. The python's scales were vivid and lifelike. It opened its mouth wide as though it wanted to swallow Han Sho whole. The crowd below stared at the three in the sky. Tyre's and Log's subordinates were shocked. With the two most powerful sovereigns in the Fringe attacking, Han Sho would surely die. With that thought, they secretly cast malicious gazes at Slank and Garp, thinking that when Han Sho is done for, the two of them who dared to stand out would suffer the same fate. Slank, Garp, and the leaders of the other factions could clearly feel the chilling aura coming from Tyre's and Log's subordinates. They knew that once Han Sho was killed, given Tyre and Garp's style, they wouldn't let them off. All of a sudden, Slank, Garp, and the others who didn't have much to do with Han Sho all hoped that Han Sho wouldn't be hurt by Tyre and Log. They hoped that Han Sho could at least tangle with the two for a while longer so that they could escape from Tyre and Log's control. Once Han Sho's performance gave them time to leave, Slank and Garp would definitely leave with their subordinates without hesitation. They would no longer be cannon fodder for Tyre and Log. With that thought in mind, the two of them were secretly worried for Han Sho. They hoped that this newly risen young expert could buy them some time. As long as they could escape from this place, they were even willing to serve Han Sho. They were willing to work for this young man who dared to take revenge on the two most powerful sovereigns for his subordinates. To these people, a leader who cared about the lives of his subordinates was far better than a leader who treated them as cannon fodder. Ha ha ha, you're angry out of humiliation. Han Sho didn't seem to know that he was facing the two most powerful sovereigns of the Fringe. He laughed arrogantly in the void. His laughter was like the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger. Before his laughter died away, Han Sho suddenly made his move. His body swayed and 13 illusory figures appeared in the air. 6 of them instantly overlapped with each other. The 6 elements of death, destruction, darkness, water, lightning, and wind merged into one. A new domain of divinity suddenly shrouded the entire area as though it had created a space out of thin air. All of a sudden, Tyre and Logue's attacks were forcefully shattered. Be it the destruction spear or Logue's python of death energy, they were all shattered in an instant. Another Honshaw formed by 6 overlapping illusory figures looked down from above like a god. His eyes were cold and merciless. He pressed his hand down, and an earth-shattering force came crashing down on Tyre and Logue like a mountain. Tyre and Logue were blasted into the ground by the void attack. Half of their bodies were buried deep underground. The whole place fell into dead silence. The subordinates of Tyre and Logue, as well as the leaders of the various forces, were all dumbstruck. They stared blankly at the illusory figure hovering in the void. Other than shock and disbelief, they had no other emotions in their hearts. Tyre and Logue, who had been struck dumb, were still half buried in the ground. Their expressions were extremely interesting. Confusion, puzzlement, shock, fear, gnashing their teeth, and other emotions were piled up on their faces, making them look like they were laughing and crying. They were as interesting as fools. "What 5 sovereigns? I think there's only 1 sovereign in the fringe," Slank muttered to himself as he suddenly snapped out of his daze. Those were Slank's thoughts. His voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence, his voice echoed in everyone's ears. "There's only 1 sovereign in the fringe. There's only 1 sovereign." For some reason, those words kept echoing in everyone's ears. In an instant, everyone seemed to have realized the situation they were in. Their absent-mindedness gradually returned to their senses. When they raised their heads to look at the sky, they felt that Honshaw was the most powerful being in the fringe. Other than him, Tyre, Logue, Wasis, and Asura would forever be relegated to supporting roles. "Impossible! How is this possible?" Tyre, the number 1 sovereign with a strong will, seemed to have lost his composure. He raised his head to look at the enormous illusory figure that was looking down at him like a god. He could feel the mysterious and unfathomable energy. All of his lofty aspirations seemed to have been extinguished in an instant. "Tyre, we still have 1 more move, use it now!" Logue, who was equally terrified, hastily shouted when he saw that Tyre was displaying an emotion that did not match his usual self. Tyre stared blankly for a moment before he suddenly turned crazy. He laughed and said, "That's right, I still have 1 last move. There will be people who will help me, there will be people who will help me." Having said that, Tyre did not care if all of Daka's men had retreated from Tanai. He immediately sent his divine signal to the device he had prepared beforehand in an attempt to detonate the 10,000 tons of energy crystals at the bottom of the omphalos. In the void above his head, Honshaw sneered as he looked at the panicking Tyre. He thought to himself, "Everything is under my control. Let's see what you can do." As expected, Tyre, who was sending his divine signal to the omphalos with all his might, suddenly realized that there was no reaction from the omphalos. This was no small matter. Tyre immediately jumped out of the ground and looked in the direction of the omphalos. He lost his composure and yelled, "Why? Why?" Logue's expression changed drastically when he heard Tyre's words. He raised his head and looked at Honshaw. Honshaw had a mocking smile on his face as if everything was under his control. Logue only needed 1 look to guess that Honshaw must have done something. Otherwise, there would be no reaction from the omphalos. "Tyre, I think it must be Brian's doing. I'm afraid the explosion in the omphalos won't happen again," Logue said to Tyre, who had lost his composure. "It can't be, it can't be!" Tyre yelled. No one knew if his craziness had triggered something. Suddenly, an earth-shattering sound came from the omphalos. In an instant, the entire ground began to tremble. A huge roar sounded as if the heavens were falling and the earth was splitting apart. Even though they were far away, everyone here could still feel the terrifying movement. Honshaw, who was smiling, froze. This time, it was his turn to be dumbfounded. He looked at the omphalos from afar, and saw that it was indeed covered in smoke. An area was covered in thick dust, and he couldn't see the situation clearly. Han Sho panicked and hurriedly used his divine sense to sense the auras of Han Jin, Andrina, and Han Hao. These three were the ones he needed to worry about the most. He didn't want anything to happen to them. His expression relaxed, and he thought to himself, fortunately, the three of them are fine. After carefully sensing again, Han Sho found that the explosion had only destroyed 1/5 of the area, and that area was originally under Tyre's control. It seemed that Tyre had set up some secret measures there. Even Han Jin and Andrina didn't notice anything unusual. This Tyre must have some tricks up his sleeve. Otherwise, the Amphalos wouldn't have exploded. Chapter 987. Tyre and Log, who were deathly pale just a moment ago, suddenly became excited. Log laughed and said, "All the hegemons are in Tanai. We killed them all in one fell swoop. Slank Garp, the situation in the fringe has changed. We are only enduring this humiliation in order to wipe out the god hunters in one fell swoop. Do you understand our intentions now? 2/3 of my men are dead. What's the point of saying that?" Slank was shocked for a long while. But when he recalled that so many of his men had died and that Log had indeed sacrificed them as cannon fodder, he no longer believed Log's words. "Brian, the god hunter hegemons are done for, and you have been avenged. We shouldn't be killing each other anymore. What we need to do now is to wipe out the god hunter survivors. What do you say?" Tyre seemed to have calmed down all of a sudden. He thought for a moment, and immediately suggested to Han Sho with a smile. As expected of an overgod who knew when to yield and when to stand tall. Seeing that Han Sho's strength had exceeded their expectations, Tyre immediately changed his attitude and treated Han Sho as an ally. Han Sho, of course, knew what Tyre was thinking. He took a glance at Amphalos, the corners of his mouth curved into a cold smile, and said, "My celestial pearl pharmacy is still open and I still have many of my men working there. You didn't inform me beforehand and didn't let me evacuate my men. Now that Amphalos has exploded, all of my men are dead. Tell me, do you think I'll still be on your side after losing so many of my men? For the sake of victory in the fringe, sacrifices are unavoidable. Brian, you should be more open-minded," Tyre hurriedly said. "Why is it always others who are sacrificed? Why are your men safe and sound? Why aren't they the ones sacrificed?" The three whys came out of Han Sho's mouth, each louder and louder than the last. Those were the thoughts of the leaders of the factions that were under Han Sho and Log's command. After Han Sho's roar, they all started to condemn Tyre and Log. "That's right. Why are you all fine? Why must we be sacrificed? Tyre, you don't care about other people's lives at all," Garp suddenly shouted. "Hee, Lord Log is even more powerful. At critical moments, he can even sacrifice his loyal subordinates. Back in the bone-burying cave, when Lord Log faced Kaw's fatal blow, he grabbed a subordinate who had been with him for 300 years to block the blow, then took the opportunity to escape. They don't even care about their own people, let alone outsiders like us." Slank mocked after witnessing Rog's actions during the battle in the catacombs. After witnessing Han Sho's power, Garp and Slank grew bolder. They believed that Tyre and Log wouldn't be able to hurt them in the face of Han Sho's terrifying power, so they vented all their pent-up frustrations. Garp and Slank weren't the only ones who were dissatisfied with Tyre and Log. After Garp and Slank, more and more people started to condemn Tyre and Log, accusing them of being disloyal. Even Log's subordinates' eyes flickered after hearing Slank's words. It wasn't their first day following Log, so they naturally knew how Log did things. Thinking about it, wasn't what Slank said reasonable? In the past, the Fringe didn't have a king like Han Sho who would wholeheartedly seek revenge for his subordinates. Without a leader like Han Sho who treated his subordinates as his family, things were still fine. But now, Tyre and Log suddenly seemed so pathetic. "What are you trying to do? Are you trying to rebel?" Log's expression changed. He suddenly realized that the eyes of his subordinates who used to be loyal to him were flickering. Logue felt that the situation wasn't looking good, but he was also afraid of Han Sho, so he couldn't help but shout coldly. Logue had accumulated his authority for a long time. Seeing him lose his temper, the subordinates immediately lowered their heads. Slank and Garp weren't Logue's subordinates. With Han Sho backing them up, they didn't care about Logue at all and continued to berate him loudly. "You're courting death!" Logue's expression changed. He suddenly charged at Slank. Sinister death energy gathered around Garp and a bone cage wrapped around Slank. Han Sho, who was coldly observing the situation below, already knew that Logue wouldn't be able to hold back. He sneered and released the combined energy of 6 elements, which covered Logue and Garp from above. Asterisk crack. Asterisk the bone cage wrapped around Slank suddenly exploded. The white bones scattered in all directions. A huge force descended from the sky and slammed into Logue. Logue couldn't dodge in time before this unstoppable force. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was flung far away. With a thought, the mystical power of a new domain of divinity engulfed Rogue like a huge net, suddenly trapping him. His eyes flashed as Han Sho noticed Tyre, who was retreating. He smirked. "Tyre, I won't touch you for now. I'd like to see what you and Daka can do together." As soon as these words came out, Tyre's face was full of horror. He immediately shouted, What did you say? Isn't Daka your brother? Didn't you and Daka plan this? Haha, you wanted to work with Daka to get rid of the rest of the people in your way. Wasn't that your plan all along? 2 experts who've reached the Overgod realm and the energy of destruction will definitely be terrifying when they work together. Didn't you want to use that power to turn the situation around? Han Sho looked at Tyre coldly with a mocking smile. What? Tyre is colluding with Daka? Garp turned pale with fright. He stared incredulously at Tyre, who seemed to have been exposed. He said hatefully, No wonder. So it turns out that you, Tyre, are the ones who betrayed the Fringe. It wasn't just Slank and Garp. All the experts in the Fringe were enraged. No matter how they thought about it, they never expected Tyre to be brothers with Daka, the current leader of the God Hunters. What did that mean? It meant that Tyre had been a traitor all along. It meant that at least half of the reason why the Fringe was so weak was because of Tyre. Even the heavily injured and temporarily imprisoned Logue was in disbelief. He looked at Tyre and smiled bitterly. I see. Tyre, you're planning to work with your brother Daka to get rid of me, aren't you? Haha, that way, you'll be the undisputed #1 in the Fringe. No one will be able to threaten your position, right? Tyre, who was being pointed at by everyone, had an ugly expression on his face. He didn't say a word. You don't need to quibble. Daka will be here soon. Haha, the situation will be clear then. I'd like to see if you and Daka can really defeat me together. Han Sho smirked as he turned to look into the distance. A figure streaked across the sky. Who else could it be but Daka? Tyre, what the hell are you doing? Why is only 1/5 of the Amphalos destroyed? And it's your side too. Daka yelled before he even arrived. Not all of the hegemons in the Amphalos were killed in the explosion. To Daka, it would be difficult to control the situation from here on out. His years of hard work had been destroyed in an instant. Daka didn't need Han Sho to say anything else to prove that Tyre and Daka were brothers. Huh! Daka suddenly exclaimed in shock. Brian, why are you here? Daka immediately noticed Han Sho. He had already witnessed Han Sho's power back in Pandemonium. Now that he saw Han Sho, he couldn't help but exclaim in shock. Deep down, Daka was still a little afraid of Han Sho. After all, the power Han Sho displayed back in Pandemonium was just too overwhelming. Daka, I gave you guys a chance, but you didn't cherish it. Han Sho put on a faint smile. Since you guys haven't left the Fringe, then don't leave. Han Sho's expression turned cold as he glared at Tyre. What else do you have to say now that things have come to this? Brothers, as long as we kill Brian, the Fringe will be ours in the future. Tyre suddenly burst into laughter. He looked at his trusted aides who had followed him all these years but now seemed a little hesitant. That's right, Daka and I are indeed brothers. I did make use of others. But aren't all of you safe and sound? Everything I do is for our own good. In the future you will see that I am the master of the Fringe and the God Hunter Alliance will never be a threat to us. Isn't that what we've been working towards? Tyre's words sounded extremely sincere. He was trying to use them to win back his subordinates' hearts. The eyes of those who had followed Tyre for many years flickered. They didn't immediately agree to continue the war with him, nor did they express any objections. All of them remained silent. I'm not even afraid of the overgods of death and light anymore. Daka suddenly realized something when he heard Hansho's words. When they left Pandemonium, they knew that the overgod of death, Nested, would definitely return to Pandemonium. The way they saw it, Hansho and his son would definitely be killed by Nested. Yet Hansho was still alive and had even said such a thing. What did that mean? Daka felt a chill run down his spine when he thought about it. So, he decisively chose not to take Hansho's attack head-on like Tyre did. Big brother! The heavily injured Tyre and Loeb were imprisoned together in that strange space. Apart from being unable to walk out or attack, Tyre's vision and voice weren't affected at all. Tyre shouted when he saw Daka fleeing without a care in the world. Daka clearly heard the sorrowful cry of Big Brother, but he didn't stop and continued running. Hansho looked at Daka's back coldly and smirked. How smart of you! But do you really think you can escape? Hansho didn't move because his consciousness had already sensed the aura of Little Skull Han Hao. Daka, who was running for his life, suddenly noticed someone standing in front of him. Looking closely, he realized that it was Han Hao, the little skull who possessed the quintessence shard. Daka made up his mind and roared. You want to stop me? Your father hurt me, so I'll use you to pay him back. He gathered all the energy in his body and formed a gigantic orb of destruction that smashed towards Han Hao like a gray sun. Little Skull Han Hao stood proudly in front of Daka with his bone spear in hand. His eyes flashed with disdain as he said, You deserve to die. As he said that, he raised his bone spear and a crystalline light shone from its tip. Evil, death, violence, and despair suddenly erupted from the center of the bone spear. In the face of such power, Daka's orb of destruction seemed so insignificant and fragile. Rumble! Rumble! Another earth-shattering explosion resounded as Daka's charge was stopped. Before he could react, the bone spear appeared in front of his eyes. Splat! The bone spear pierced through his eyes and nailed him in midair. In an instant, Daka's flesh and soul were absorbed by the bone spear. His despair, rage, and other negative emotions were affected by the new quintessence in Han Hao's body and turned into wisps of smoke that were swallowed by Han Hao, causing the light in Han Hao's eyes to grow brighter and brighter. Daka couldn't understand how Han Shu and his son could reach such heights in just a few short days. How dare you destroy my home? You deserve to die! Pulling out the bone spear, Daka's iron-like divine body dissipated like dust. In the blink of an eye, Daka completely disappeared. Having lost all of his soul, he died a horrible death. After killing Daka, Han Hao didn't immediately head to Hansho's side. Instead, he sent a telepathic message, Father, I've killed Daka. I'm heading to the Amphilas now. Tanai still has a few hegemons there. I'm going to make sure none of them walk out of the Fringe alive. Go, I'll be there in a moment, replied Hansho. Soon after, he looked at the temporarily imprisoned Loeg and Tyre with a beaming smile and said, Tyre, your brother escaped before you, so you will die a little faster. Haha, if you can communicate telepathically, you should know that he's done for. Tyre, who was still hating Daka for not showing his brotherhood, was dumbfounded when he heard Hansho's words. Using the magical mirror to communicate with him, Tyre suddenly burst into laughter. Ha ha, damn it! Let's die together! Suddenly, a powerful wave of destruction emanated from Tyre's body. A ball of light engulfed Tyre and Logue. The space that imprisoned Tyre and Logue trembled violently. Even Logue, who didn't want to die, couldn't avoid the shockwave. Tyre's divine body exploded along with his. Seeing Tyre commit suicide, Han Shu immediately took action. He hurriedly removed the energy that imprisoned the two and tossed the cauldron of myriad demon out. Even if he couldn't collect the energy within their bodies, he wanted to at least obtain 2 pure divine souls. The divine consciousness of an overgod crystal was more precious than anything else. With Tyre's and Logue's divine souls, he could help the Han family members who cultivated in the energy of death and destruction to further understand the power of an overgod. With enough divine essences to increase the divine energy in their bodies, the Han family would have 2 more experts with overgod crystals. Fortunately, Han Shu acted in time and the cauldron of myriad demon was truly powerful. Before the souls of Tyre and Tyre could collide with the light, the cauldron of myriad demon absorbed them and preserved their divine souls. When Tyre heard that Daka had been killed, he cursed himself and committed suicide. This made Han Shu feel a little strange. He didn't know if it was because the two were brothers or if Tyre had no regrets after seeing Daka die first. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to escape from Han Shu, he chose to commit suicide. As for those Amphalos shop owners who are hiding in the fringe, you just need to spread the word and let them return to the Amphalos after the storm is over. Upon finishing those words, Han Shu abruptly flew away and disappeared from their sight in an instant. From today onwards, there will no longer be any 5 sovereigns in the fringe. Slank stared blankly for a moment before he forced a smile and said, Lord Brian's achievements have far surpassed those of the 5 sovereigns. As long as he's in the fringe will always be his. That's good too. With one person ruling the fringe, at least there won't be endless wars. Garp thought for a moment before he suddenly laughed and said, No matter what, Lord Brian treats his people very well. If one day we can become the guards of the Han family, that wouldn't be too bad. That's only possible if he takes a liking to us. Slank sighed and said, Before the war, many people wanted to join the Han family, but they didn't take a liking to any of them. At first, I thought that the House of Han didn't know how to appreciate favors. But now, I realize that they don't care about us at all. If it weren't for Pandemonium, the Fringe would have long since become the headquarters of the God Hunter Alliance. We must work hard and hope that Lord Brian will take a liking to us and become a member of the Han family. Garp nodded heavily. Han Shu's performance in dealing with Tyre and Logue alone had won them over. They couldn't help but regard Han Shu as the strongest person in the fringe. While Garp and the others were talking, Han Shu appeared in the Amphalos. A loud explosion rocked the Amphalos. The area under Tyre's jurisdiction was obliterated. Many shops were turned into rubble in an instant, and the ground caved in. All the god hunters in the area and those who did not evacuate were killed. Only Tuckamore and Acer managed to survive, but they were severely injured and almost lost the ability to move. Tuckamore and Acer happened to be there when the explosion happened. The explosion came without warning and they couldn't dodge in time. They were instantly engulfed by the force of the explosion. Fortunately, the explosion only happened in one area of the Amphalos. If all 5 sovereigns in the Amphalos were to explode, the combined force of the explosion would affect each other tenfold. If that really happened, Tuckamore and Acer would have no chance of survival. They would probably be killed in an instant. When Han Shu arrived at the Amphalos, he saw that all the hegemons were evacuating from Tanai in a panic. The explosion from Tyre's area was too terrifying. They didn't know if the area under their feet would explode the next moment. They were all panic-stricken. Tuckamore, Acer, Regis, Isaiah, Miller, Belinton, and Cause were left with only 7 hegemons. Tuckamore and Acer were heavily injured, while Isaiah, Regis, and Miller hadn't fully recovered from their injuries in Pandemonium. Only Belinton and Cause were still at their peak. Han Hao, wielding his bone spear, took the lead and stood in front of the 7 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance, coldly facing off against them. Sinister negative energy leaked from his body. Unlike Nestet and the Goddess of Destiny, Han Hao's quintessence could no longer be concealed. The unstoppable energy emanating from him intimidated all 7 hegemons. Han Shuo's arrival had thoroughly terrified the 7 hegemons. The young hegemon had already given them a tremendous amount of pressure. Now that the old hegemon had arrived, the last bit of confidence they had left in their hearts had vanished. "Father, there are 7 of them, no one missing," Little Skeleton said softly when he saw Han Shuo coming over. Han Shuo nodded smilingly. He turned his gaze to the 7 people in front of him and said, "Everyone, we meet again. Haha, the explosion at Amphalos was part of Daka and Tyre's plan. They buried 10,000 tons of energy crystals at the bottom of Amphalos, intending to kill all of you in one fell swoop. It's a good thing I came prepared and let you live until now." The 7 hegemons didn't have much confidence in facing Han Shuo now. Their subordinates were scattered all over the place, and if they were to run away now, they wouldn't be able to survive in their own divine dominions. Especially when half of them were injured, they really didn't know what to do against Han Shuo. "What do you want?" Isaiah hung his head dejectedly. The lofty aspirations he had when he came to the fringe had been erased. All he wanted now was to get as far away from this place as possible with his subordinates. He hoped that he would never see Han Shuo again. "What do I want?" Han Shuo stroked his chin and put on a sinister smirk. With one thought, his 6 avatars combined into one and unleashed a power that could look down on all living things. It formed an enormous glass canopy that enveloped the remaining 7. "I gave you a chance, but you didn't cherish it. You even dared to stay in the fringe and commit atrocities. Since that's the case, don't blame me for being rude." Han Shuo laughed heartily and started shrinking the glass canopy like an eggshell, squeezing the 7 hegemons in the center. Of the 7 hegemons, only Belinton and Kaz could use their full strength. Tuckamore and Acer were heavily injured and didn't have the strength to fight back. Isaiah and the other 2 were still injured, having been beaten up by Han Shuo in Pandemonium. Now that they were facing Han Shuo again, they had less than 70% of their strength left. How could they possibly be a match for Han Shuo with their current strength? Not to mention, Han Shuo had a little skull with a quintessence by his side. Given Han Shuo and his son's current strength, unless they ran into an overgod with a quintessence, they wouldn't be a match for them on Elysium. You dare kill us?" Kaz, a hegemon who cultivated in the Edict of Life, seemed to know some secrets. He shrieked, "We hegemons have existed since time immemorial. Even the 12 quintessence overgods have tacitly acknowledged our existence and refrained from attacking us. You dare?" When the Goddess of Destiny arrived at Pandemonium, she had vaguely revealed some information about the God Hunter Alliance. It seemed that the existence of the God Hunters was indeed necessary, which was why the 12 overgods didn't attack them. Even when the Goddess of Destiny's partner was killed by the God Hunters, she didn't exterminate all God Hunters. That was enough to prove that the God Hunters had a special meaning. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Han Shuo put on a carefree smile and clenched his hand. Kaz's bones cracked and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face contorted in pain. You seem to know something, don't you?" Han Shuo nodded and laughed. Very good. Since I can't learn anything from the Goddess of Destiny, it seems that I can learn something from you." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo summoned the cauldron of myriad demon and enveloped Kaz within it. While refining Kaz's divine soul with the cauldron, Han Shuo gathered the energy of his 6 elemental fusion and avatars to surround and kill the remaining 6 hegemons. He muttered, "The existence of God Hunters is necessary. I won't exterminate all God Hunters. I only want you hegemons to die and use your divine souls to fuel the power of my Han family." As he spoke, Han Shuo gathered all of his energy into a single point and released it. With the crisp sound of eggshells cracking, the bodies of the hegemons exploded and their divine souls flew into the cauldron of myriad demon that was refining Kaz's soul. Chapter 989. Surrounded by the cauldron of myriad demon, Ka's divine soul was like a candle flickering in the wind, flickering erratically. Given the realm of Han Shuo's consciousness and the cauldron of myriad demons' power to manipulate Ka's divine soul, Han Shuo was able to extract all of Ka's experiences from the moment he was born. He could even extract memories that Ka couldn't remember from the depths of Ka's soul. Only memories that existed couldn't escape Han Shuo's great soul-searching art. Han Shuo's consciousness spread across Ka's mind like a giant net. Threads of his consciousness wrapped around Ka's divine soul and dug out everything from the depths of his memories. Ka's cultivated in the energy of life. At his realm, he had already escaped the fate of life and death. In his long life, he had experienced many things that left a deep impression on him. It would take Han Shuo at least a day or two to comb through all of Ka's memories. After all, Ka had lived for nearly 10,000 years and had experienced many things every single day. His memory was as vast as the ocean, and it wouldn't be that easy to sort through. Han Shuo, on the other hand, wasn't interested in the trifling matters of Ka's life. He wasn't a pervert who liked to pry into other people's privacy. Therefore, Han Shuo focused on the most important part of Ka's memories. Han Shuo didn't even need to think to know that those were the most important memories in the depths of Ka's soul. Memories that he often thought about were much clearer than those of his daily life. Soon enough, Han Shuo found what he was looking for. Han Shuo's consciousness enveloped this deep memory, and used the great soul-searching art to retrieve it in his sea of consciousness. This memory happened a few hundred years ago, not too far from the present. At that time, Ka had yet to become an over-god or become a god hunter. He was the patriarch of a major family clan in the Life Dominion. As the patriarch of a major family clan in the Life Dominion, not only was he not a god hunter, but he was also a hunter who hated god hunters to the core. While fighting against the god hunters in the Life Dominion, Ka was betrayed by a cousin of his and was imprisoned by the god hunters in a gorge called Tanai. Within 15 minutes, all of Ka's clansmen were slaughtered by the god hunters. Ka's wife and son were not spared. Ka, on the other hand, was stopped by the hegemon of the Life Dominion. He could only watch helplessly as his wife was raped and his son was dismembered. It was an unforgettable memory. Back then, the hegemon was merely a late-stage high god while Ka was merely an early-stage high god. He was no match for the hegemon, and could only endure the humiliation for the rest of his life. Prior to this, Ka had hunted down god hunters in every city in the Life Dominion, and was their greatest enemy. The former hegemon of the Life Dominion captured Ka and learned a few things about god hunters from the hegemon of the Life Dominion. That hegemon once told Ka that god hunters were an indispensable part of Elysium. The existence of every god on Elysium possessed too much elemental edictal energy. If the number of gods on Elysium exceeded a certain limit, the energy of heaven and earth would change. Such a change would affect the quintessence over gods and seemed to be very detrimental to the quintessence. Therefore, the hegemon told Ka that god hunters would never disappear from Elysium because their existence would reduce the number of gods on Elysium every day. It would effectively prevent such a situation from happening. For the quintessence over gods, the god hunters were actually helping them eliminate some of the hidden dangers. He rejected all of Ka's previous actions, saying that Ka's previous actions were idiotic and that the Life Dominions over God just wanted him to fight the god hunters endlessly. It didn't matter if the god hunters died or their loyal subordinates were killed, it wasn't a bad thing for the quintessence over gods. In the end, Ka didn't die. The divine guards of every major city in the Life Dominion arrived just in time. Ka, who had lost a portion of his divine energy, was lucky enough to survive. Having lost most of his divine energy, Ka's strength was greatly reduced. When he returned to his family, he found that his cousin who had betrayed him had replaced him as the new patriarch. Having lost a portion of his divine energy, Ka was no longer a match for his cousin. He was defeated and chased out of his family. After his wife and children were killed and his cousin betrayed him, Ka's personality changed drastically. He abandoned his faith in the Overgod of life. For the sake of revenge, Kaz suddenly became the craziest god hunter. He started by devouring the weakest gods and recovered his divine energy bit by bit. After more than 100 years, Kaz killed his cousin and slaughtered all the members of his family who had betrayed him. In the end, even the former hegemon of the Life Dominion couldn't escape from Kaz's hands. Kaz used the most insidious method to burn his soul with poisonous flames. It took him more than 200 years to exhaust the last bit of energy in his soul. He only died after suffering for 200 years. Afterward, Kaz, who had lost his faith, became the new hegemon of the Life Dominion. His strength soared and he ascended to the realm of Overgod. Han Sho took a deep breath and carefully stored Kaz's divine soul. He imprisoned it in a special corner of the cauldron of Myriad Demon, and used the power of the cauldron to remove the impurities in Kaz's divine soul, leaving only the purest comprehension of the Edict of Life for Han Mu to absorb. Sigh, what a pitiful man! Sighed Han Sho. Han Sho let out a soft sigh. After learning about Kaz's experiences from his memories, Han Sho no longer felt any hatred for Kaz. He felt that Kaz's life was truly pitiful. He also understood Kaz's desperation to become a god hunter. In that situation, it was almost impossible for Kaz, who had lost most of his divine power, to use his original path to avenge his wife and child. Everything that mattered to him in his life was taken away. Even the faith he had built up over many years had crumbled in an instant. It was only natural that his personality would undergo a drastic change. Father, he said that there is a need for god hunters to exist? Really? When Little Skull saw that Han Sho had sent his consciousness into Kaz's mind, he knew that Han Sho could easily obtain all of Kaz's memories. Han Sho nodded and sneered. Too many gods will occupy too much of the energy of the 12 elements. When a certain element is occupied too much by a god, the god of that element will undergo a mutation. Such a mutation is very bad for the overgods who possess the quintessence. Therefore, they need to maintain a delicate balance. At this point, Han Sho suddenly recalled the war of the gods mentioned by the goddess of destiny and the god of light. He wondered if there was a reason for the war of the gods. According to the god of light and the goddess of destiny, a war of the gods would definitely occur before the opening of Eternia. Many gods would die during the war. Could their deaths be a necessary procedure for the opening of Eternia? On Elysium, every once in a while, a great war would break out that would engulf all of the dominions. Many geniuses would perish in those wars before they could truly become top experts. During the most crucial moments, the goddess of destiny would appear and calm the wars. Previously, Han Sho didn't understand why such a thing would happen and why the goddess of destiny would wait for many years before resolving the war. But now that he had learned these secrets from Kaz's memories, Han Sho had his own guesses and vaguely understood some things. Balance? Little Skull stared blankly for a moment before he suddenly asked. Father, are you saying that the existence of the god hunters is tacitly approved by the 12 overgods? You have seen the power of Nestet and Judas. Any one of them could wipe out all the god hunters in the 12 dominions. Also, Andrina said that the goddess of destiny's lover died at the hands of the god hunters and that Andrina nearly died from exhaustion of the energy of her soul. However, even with such deep-rooted hatred, the goddess of destiny didn't wipe out all the god hunters. I believe that Kaz's words are believable. Other than the existence of the god hunters, I really don't know any other reason why they wouldn't wipe out the god hunters, said Han Sho in a deep voice. Does that mean that the 12 quintessence overgods won't meddle in my business even if I unite the god hunters? Asked Han Hao after a moment of silence. Suddenly his eyes lit up. That's right. As long as what you do is in line with their interests, they won't interfere. Han Sho thought for a moment before he said, however, the power of faith from the living gods in the 12 dominions is also very useful to the overgods. They need the faith of those gods, but at the same time, they don't want their numbers to be too large. It's like a scale, seeking a delicate balance. You shouldn't act too recklessly, or the 12 overgods might attack together. We are not their match for the time being, so we have to be careful. Understood, Father. I'll be careful. Han Hao nodded in understanding. It was at this moment that 2 whistles sounded from the distance. After a short while, Salus and Wasis appeared before Han Shuo. Salus, who had no idea what was happening, hastily reported, Brian, many divine guards from the 12 dominions have gathered and are heading towards the fringe. It seems that they are planning to attack the God Hunters and us. Han Shuo nodded and said, if they want to maintain a delicate balance, the God Hunter Alliance can't be too powerful. With the 12 dominions, the number of God Hunters in the Alliance might be a little too much for them to handle. They are probably planning to purge the Alliance, right? Father, what should we do? Asked Han Hao. Han Shuo bunched his brows as he looked at the God Hunters who had lost their 7 hegemons and were looking at him with fear. He smiled and said, you are the new leader of the God Hunters. You can decide what to do. I think the most important thing is to subdue them. I understand. Little Skeleton nodded and began to organize the God Hunters around him. Chapter 990. There were a total of 12 hegemons in the God Hunter Alliance. But now, not a single one of them was left. The God Hunters who had lost their hegemons were at a loss and had no idea where they could go in the future. At such a time, what they needed the most was someone who could bring a new light to the God Hunters. Little Skull, Han Hao, in terms of strength, power, and his identity as a God Hunter, was more than qualified to take on such a heavy responsibility. It didn't take long for Little Skeleton to unleash the terrifying quintessence energy on his body. All the God Hunters prostrated themselves at his feet, obediently acknowledging his unrivaled position in the God Hunter Alliance. Father, I might need to leave the fringe for some time. I will bring them away from the fringe and consolidate the power of the God Hunters in the other dominions. I will solidify my position as the leader of the God Hunter Alliance. Little Skull bade farewell to Han Shuo. The dead hegemons still had many experts under them scattered across the dominions. They were left behind by the 12 hegemons to oversee the overall situation and were unaware of the situation in the fringe. Now that all the hegemons were dead, Little Skull needed to intimidate those with ulterior motives and consolidate all the God Hunters under his command as soon as possible. Han Shuo nodded and smilingly said, go ahead. Take Polo and the others with you. Be careful when you leave the fringe. Don't run into the city lords of the other dominions who are coming to kill you. I'm sure the 12 quintessence overgods will be satisfied with the outcome of the battle in the fringe. However, their subordinates won't be able to get word from them that they won't attack the God Hunters. You should know what to do. Little Skull had demon generals at his disposal. Now that he had formed a new quintessence, he could easily detect the location and distribution of power of the divine guards in the other dominions. It wouldn't be difficult for him to avoid their encirclement. I shall take my leave then. I will come back to see you after some time. I still need to comprehend the quintessence energy. Little Skull didn't dawdle. He gestured for the kneeling God Hunters to follow him. He went to the edge of the Amphilas and found Polo. He instructed him to gather all the God Hunter brigades in the fringe and leave the fringe with him for the time being. Han Shuo watched as Little Skull gave out his orders in an orderly manner and walked further and further away from the fringe. He felt a little reluctant to part with him. However, that feeling was quickly replaced by joy. Han Shuo was truly happy for Little Skull. Of Elysium. As of the most important person in his life, Han Shuo hoped that Little Skull would not only have the power to protect himself, but he would also have the power to rule over others. Only those who had the most power could stand on the continent. Soon enough, Little Skull's aura was getting further and further away from Han Shuo. Han Shuo suppressed the emotions in his heart. It was also at this moment that Han Shuo sensed the aura of Akeley, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Akeley came over with a big smile on his face and said, Brian, it's all settled. Those troublesome poisoners and those eccentrics you mentioned are all docile now. Akeley, you've worked hard. Haha, from today onwards, the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy will become the most powerful pharmacy on the continent. As long as we put in some effort and set up branches in every divine domain, we can count our black crystal coins in peace," said Hans Shaw smilingly. The Celestial Pearl Pharmacy was already very famous, but it was all because of the medicinal pellets he refined. There weren't many pharmacists who were truly skilled. It was impossible for Hans Shaw to spend too much energy on the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, nor could he waste too much time on refining medicinal pellets. Therefore, the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy must have pharmacists who could truly hold the fort. The talented pharmacists of the Amphilos were exactly what Hans Shaw lacked the most. With them joining the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy, Hans Shaw would truly have no worries in the future. "Father!" Han Jean and Andrina walked over from the Amphilos. Their clothes were ragged and there were traces of dust on their faces. They seemed to have been affected by Tanai's explosion. "Are you two all right?" Han Shu immediately cried out in alarm. He was the one who arranged for Han Jean and Andrina to stop the explosion in the Amphilos. He did not expect that the Amphilos would explode. Although they were special lifeforms, Han Shu was still rather worried. "I'm fine," replied Han Jean smilingly. He glanced at the radiant Andrina and smilingly said, "Not only are we fine, but we also benefited from it. The explosion did not harm us at all. Instead, it allowed our bodies to gather a lot of energy." "Ha!" Han Shu's face lit up. He discreetly probed Han Jean and Andrina's physical condition with his consciousness. Sure enough, he discovered that the energy in their bodies seemed to be much more profound than before. Han Shu nodded smilingly and said, not bad at all. I knew that you two would be fine. Given your special life forms and bodies, the explosion of the energy crystals would only benefit you too." After a short pause, Han Shu asked, "Did Tyre set up something else in his area?" "Yes, Tyre is indeed treacherous. Every area in the Amphilos has a special energy device that can receive instructions from his divine soul. But in his area, he set up 3 more energy devices. They are all hidden in very well hidden places. There are even special boundaries on them that conceal the slightest energy undulations. Before we could set them up, Tyre had already released the signal of the explosion." "That's why we couldn't stop it," explained Andrina. "Father, I'm sorry. We couldn't stop the explosion in that area," apologized Han Jean. "You guys have done well enough." Naturally, Han Shu wouldn't blame them. He turned to Wasis and said, "Have your men from Glacial Peak head to the Pandemonium first. I'm worried that the God Hunter Alliance isn't the only target of the 12 Dominions." Wasis's expression slightly changed. He nodded and left without saying a word. A magical mirror suddenly appeared in his hand. He was communicating with his subordinates in a remote corner. "Salus, the Empyrean Peak will belong to you in the future. There are still many scattered factions in the fringe. With your strength, recruit as many as you can. I have more than enough people on my side. I won't allow them to join the Han family. Those from the 12 Dominions might come. Use this opportunity to subdue them. Anyone who belongs to you can seek refuge in the Pandemonium," promised Han Shu to Salus with a smile. Salus was overjoyed. He laughed and said, "That's true loyalty." He knew that if the Pandemonium was willing to open its gates, the leaders of the scattered forces would definitely submit to the Pandemonium and Han Shu. They would never submit to him. Now that Han Shu had assured him that he would put an end to those people's schemes and said that as long as they were his people, they could seek refuge in Pandemonium. With Han Shu's promise, Salus would definitely be able to gather his forces at this critical juncture. "I will make it clear to everyone in the fringe that the 3 of us are on good terms. I will also strictly order my men not to attack your men or Wasis's men. Haha, the 3 of us will govern the fringe from now on," said Han Shu smilingly. Salus shook his head and said in a deadpan manner, "Brian, I appreciate your kindness. However, times have changed. Wasis and I have discussed this. From now on, you will be the only sovereign in the fringe. The two of us will be your Han family's subjects. How can we do that? Cried Han Shu in shock. At this moment, Wasis came to an agreement with his men. He walked to Han Shu and said in a deep voice, Brian, your strength has far surpassed ours. Everyone in the fringe knows that you are the one who resolved the crisis. We are not qualified to be your equals. Brian, don't decline. The fringe has its own rules. Only the strong are respected. You are strong enough to be respected. We trust you. Salus nodded and laughed heartily. With you in the fringe, even the overgods with quintessence will have to think twice before dealing with the fringe. From now on, we don't have to fight and kill all day. The fringe should have its own rules like the other major cities. It was hard to refuse such hospitality. Moreover, Wasis and Salus were being so sincere. Han Shu knew that he had no choice but to agree. After thinking for a moment, Han Shu nodded and said, In that case, I won't decline any more. From now on, the Omphalos will no longer exist. I will rebuild the Omphalos and name it Hexapolis. Just like any other city, I will be the city lord and you will be the chiefs of divine guards. The three of us will govern it together. Hexapolis. Hexapolis. Salus repeated the name a few times. He mumbled, The name sounds a little strange, but it does sound imposing. All right. Let's call it Hexapolis then, shouted Wasis. I won't go to the Pandemonium. I will stay in Demonic City for the time being. I want to see what the 12 divine guards can do to me. Suddenly, Han Shu felt a sense of heroism. He thought to himself, given my strength and my importance to the 12 overgods, what do I have to worry about before I activate Eternia? The quintessence overgods definitely won't make things difficult for me at this time. Apart from them, who else on Elysium could be a match for me? With that thought in mind, Han Shu felt that he had nothing to worry about at all. He laughed heartily as he gathered the demonic energy in his body. A stream of pitch-black demonic energy fell into the ruins of Log's territory. The demonic energy swirled around and gathered a few large rocks nearby before flying towards him. Bang! Bang! With a few deafening noises, a few 10-meter-tall boulders were erected at the entrance. Strands of black lines swam across the smooth and flat surface of the boulders. One could only hear the caw-caw sounds of the boulders as pieces of rubble were sent flying. After a while, a strong gust of wind blew past, blowing away the dust and debris on the rocks. Then, 3 majestic words appeared on the rocks: Hexapolis. Chapter 991. Apart from Han Shu, Wasis and Salus were also stationed in Hexapolis. Wasis had already sent word that his subordinates would head to the Pandemonium to seek refuge. Salus, on the other hand, made use of this time to roam around Hexapolis and meet with the leaders of the various factions. Han Shu clearly stated that the Han family would not want him, and that the fringe would be jointly managed by him, Salus, and Wasis. It was only after Han Shu's message was sent out that the leaders of the various factions who didn't take Salus seriously considered his proposal. A few leaders who knew that they weren't strong enough and that they wouldn't be able to strut around even if the fringe returned to normal accepted Salus's sincere invitation to serve under him. Han Shu purged the divine souls of the god hunter hegemons from the celestial pearl-pharmacy, leaving behind only the purest understanding of the profound mysteries of energy. He made a few profound orbs and had Han Jin and Andrina bring them to the Pandemonium. In this battle, Han Shu captured all the Godhunter hegemons in one fell swoop. Daka, Tyre, Log, Acer, Tuckamore, Sant, Regis, Miller, Belinton, and Cause made from the souls of Tuckamore, Cause, and Belinton. Naturally, Han Shu, Han Hua, and Han Mu's profound orbs were given to Han Hua, Han Mu, and Han Shui. Other than Han Hua, Han Mu, and Han Shui, Akli received a destruction orb from Tyre's divine soul. Fanny would receive Log's pure divine soul orb of death, while Emily would naturally receive Acer's darkness orb. There were also destruction orbs made from Daka's divine soul, earth orbs made from Isaiah's divine soul, lightning orbs made from Regis's, and wind orbs made from Miller's. Han Shuo also handed them to Han Jin, indicating for Han Jin to use them on his family members. The fact that Han Jin was able to become the owner of Goldstone meant that he wasn't any less intelligent than Little Skull Han Hao. Ever since he befriended Andrina, he had been evolving at a rapid pace. Han Shuo felt at ease leaving such an important item in Han Jin's hands. After Han Jin and Andrina left, Han Shuo settled down in Fringe Hexopolis. He spread the news that people from all over the Fringe were coming to the Land of Chaos, and at the same time, he came up with new rules for Fringe Hexopolis. With the full support of Wasis and Salis, Han Shuo became the undisputed #1 person in Fringe Hexopolis. Imitating some of the rules of Ethereal City and the City of Shadows, Han Shuo came up with a new set of rules. Han Shuo vetoed all the tyrannical rules of Amphilos. From now on, Fringe Hexopolis would become the true center of the Fringe. Gods who entered Fringe Hexopolis would no longer have to pay black crystal coins and could stay as long as they wanted. The God Hunter War that had engulfed the Fringe had caused a sharp decline in the population of the Fringe. Many of the Fringe dwellers who used to live in the Fringe had either been slaughtered by the God Hunters or had temporarily left the Fringe to seek refuge in remote and desolate places. As the Fringe was now sparsely populated, Han Shuo had come up with many favorable measures and new rules to restore the Fringe as soon as possible. It took Han Shuo a few days to come up with the new rules of Fringe Hexopolis. After everything was back on track, Han Shuo cultivated in the secret room beneath Celestial Pearl that Earth Elite Zombie had opened up for him. Ever since Han Shuo made a breakthrough in his state of mind during the battle at Pandemonium, he discovered that the 13 avatars formed from the demon generals and various energies in the demonic cauldron were incredibly powerful. A single avatar might not be as powerful as an overgod without the quintessence, but when two avatars fused, they would be even more powerful than an overgod without the quintessence like Tyre. Although the new avatars formed from the fusion of 6 energies weren't as powerful as an overgod with the quintessence, they were still terrifyingly powerful. So-called pseudo-overgods like Tyre and Loeb couldn't even put up the slightest resistance against them. Judging from the strength of the new avatars, if all 13 were successfully fused, Han Shuo believed that even an overgod with the quintessence wouldn't necessarily be a match for him. Every time he thought of this possibility, Han Shuo would get a little excited. Judging from the current situation, it wasn't impossible to fuse the 13 energies together. Unfortunately, the fusion of 6 energies was Han Shuo's limit. During this period of time, Han Shuo had been trying to see if he could fuse the other 7 avatars, but he just couldn't find the right opportunity to do so. He had tried fusing the other 7 energies once, but he still couldn't fuse them together. This gave Han Shuo quite a headache. Han Shuo sat cross-legged in the underground secret room. The 6 avatars of destruction, death, darkness, lightning, wind, and water gradually overlapped with each other. As soon as the 2 energies fused together, the 6 energies were like 6 streams flowing together. They immediately strengthened and formed a new energy. Han Shuo took a deep breath and continued to fuse the energy of light with the energy of the 6 elements. However, he discovered that as soon as his avatar of light approached the source of the fused energy, it would be repelled by a force. Han Shuo wasn't in a hurry. As he tried repeatedly, he used his consciousness to carefully feel for the reason. Gradually, Han Shuo discovered that the energy of light was being repelled by a very distinct energy of darkness. That energy of darkness in his avatar that had fused with 6 elemental energies had become abnormally powerful. It seemed to be on the verge of breaking away from the state of fusion. Han Shuo tried many times, but every time, he discovered that the fused energy of darkness would repel the newly added energy of light. After many fruitless attempts, he had no choice but to give up and start experimenting with other energies. After the energy of light, Han Shuo tried the other 6 energies: fire, life, space-time, fate, fighting aura, and earth. Among them, the energy of fire repelled the energy of water, and the energy of life repelled the energy of death. Only the four energies of space-time, fate, earth, and fighting aura did not feel this kind of repulsion. However, there were no signs of fusion. Light and darkness opposed each other. Death and life opposed each other. Water and fire were incompatible. These six energies seemed to be natural enemies. It seemed as though there was no possibility of them fusing. Han Sho thought about it carefully for a while. He felt that these six energies might not be difficult to fuse, but it should be rather difficult. Thinking about it this way, Han Sho felt that he should spend more effort on fusing space-time, fate, earth, and fighting aura. Among these four energies, there were some special types of fighting aura that seemed to be the easiest to deal with. When he fused his fighting aura with his avatar, Han Sho vaguely felt a little comfortable. Although he couldn't fuse it with his avatar for the time being, he felt that the fusion of fighting aura should be the easiest. Han Sho spent a dozen or so days meditating in silence. During this period of time, Han Sho did not make any breakthroughs. However, he had a clear direction. He planned to spend more time and effort on the four energies of space, destiny, earth, and fighting aura, especially the energy of fighting aura. As for light, fire, and life, Han Sho felt that he should leave them for last. It was obvious that fusing these three energies would be extremely difficult. It was still unknown whether or not he could fuse them. One day, Han Sho came out from his meditation. He went to Wasis and Salas and asked them to bring all the scattered people into Hexopolis. Han Sho's powerful consciousness could sense that the divine guards from the 12 divine dominions were about to arrive at Hexopolis. "Brian, how many are there?" Salas bunched his brows and appeared rather worried. "More than the Godhunter Alliance," replied Han Sho calmly. He shot a glance at Salas and said, "But you don't have to worry. Numbers won't change anything. I'd like to see what they can do to me." As long as Han Sho was in the fringe, the connection between him and Little Skull Han Hao would not disappear. Han Sho had communicated with Little Skull a few days ago when the connection was about to be severed. From Little Skull Han Hao, Han Sho learned that the Godhunter Alliance did not suffer too great a loss and had left the fringe. The information from Little Skull Han Hao allowed Han Sho to learn about the number of divine guards from the 12 divine dominions. However, Han Sho did not pay too much attention to it. He only remembered one of them, the Keeper of Light, Jar. Among the leaders of the expedition to the fringe was McKinley, the city lord of Ethereal City who was closest to the fringe. He was one of Han Sho's closest friends and had communicated with Han Sho before he came. Therefore, Han Sho was well aware of the movements of the fringe. "Brian, Jar has also come. If possible, I hope you can help me get rid of Jar." In the magical mirror, McKinley wore an indignant face and said hatefully, "Jar has actually broken through to the Overgod realm. Jar is the one leading the expedition against the God Hunters and the Fringe. Sigh, I'm still no match for Jar. I've been mocked and ridiculed by Jar along the way. I know that I'm no match for him, but I can only endure it." In the magical mirror, McKinley kept complaining to Han Sho about Jar, one of the 3 keepers of light. Han Sho felt some sympathy for McKinley. He had been sealed away by Jar for so many years and yet he was still no match for him. Not only that, he had no choice but to participate in the expedition against the Fringe and the God Hunter Alliance. Coincidentally, he had run into Jar. Not only could he not avenge Jar, he even had his dignity trampled on. One could imagine the indignation in McKinley's heart. Jar, one of the 3 keepers of light, was fiercely loyal to the God of Light. Back in Pandemonium, the God of Light had vaguely warned Han Sho not to touch Jar. However, Han Sho, who had always disliked the temple of the God of Light back on Profound Continent, had never considered the God of Light a friend. This time was no exception. The corners of Han Sho's mouth curled into a sneer as he watched the 12 great divine guards gradually approaching him. Chapter 992. Outside the Hexopolis, the experts from the 12 dominions had finally arrived. They were temporarily gathered at the peak of a barren mountain, observing from afar and discussing in low voices from time to time. McKinley wore a dark face. From time to time, his eyes would glance at Jar, who was dressed in the elder robes of the Temple of God of Light and had a white beard. He saw Jar laughing and chatting with the chiefs of divine guards. As one of the 3 keepers of light under the command of the God of Light, Jar possessed outstanding strength and was very active among the chiefs of divine guards. Apart from Yaris from the dominion of darkness and a few leaders from the dominions of death and destruction, the others were a little wary of Gil. The dominions of God of Light, Life, and Water had always been at odds with the dominions of death, destruction, and darkness. They would often have small frictions, and they were even sworn enemies during the War of the Gods. Normally, it would have been impossible for them to work together given their antagonistic relationship. However, the Godhunter alliance was too much of a threat. With so many experts from various divine dominions here, it was inevitable that Gil and Yaris would run into each other. Jar and Yaris almost started fighting as soon as they saw each other. Although they managed to control their emotions, they seemed to mind their own business. There was a clear distinction between the two parties, and they looked at each other with ferocious gazes. Judging from the current situation, once the war between the Godhunter Alliance and the Fringe was over, it was highly likely that the 6 factions led by Gil and Yaris would start a war in the Fringe over the slightest disagreement. Jar and his party were in one area, while Yaris and his party were in another. Meanwhile, McKinley stood by himself. From time to time, Jar would mock him for his incompetence. Hexapolis? Suddenly Jar, who was in the distance, sneered. He looked at the 4 big words that Han Shuo had erected on the boulder and sneered. He changed his name? Haha, he's going to be razed to the ground soon, and he actually changed his name at this time. This person is really interesting. Jar put on a smile, turned to McKinley and said, McKinley, do you think those from the Godhunter Alliance have killed that so-called friend of yours? As far as I know, that youngster named Brian has a pretty good relationship with you. You have been taking special care of the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy in Ethereal City. Furthermore, you cultivate in the Edict of Space. If he is still alive, you two should be in contact, right? No comment. McKinley snorted coldly and turned his head away, ignoring Jar. McKinley, oh McKinley, Ethereal City is right next to the Fringe and yet you know nothing about it. I really don't know how you managed to become the City Lord of Ethereal City. Jar shot a glance at McKinley and mocked. Brian won't be killed that easily. If he is really in the Fringe, Jar, do you dare to fight him alone? Yaris suddenly sneered and teased Jar. Jar stared blankly for a moment as though he did not expect Yaris to say that. After thinking for a moment, Jar chuckled and said, I heard that Brian had been to the City of Gorging Clouds. Haha, you, Darkwater, and Darkstone seem to have joined forces to deal with him. Unfortunately, it seems that you all suffered a loss. Jar suddenly smiled and shook his head. He mumbled to himself. Yaris, it seems that not only have you not improved over the years, you have even regressed. To think that even the 3 city lords of your darkness dominion couldn't handle a nameless youngster. Haha, perhaps I have overestimated you. Oh? Yaris wasn't angry at all. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile as he instigated. If we really meet Brian later, why don't you deal with him yourself? No matter who it is, we can still share some of the burden with you. Jar didn't put Han Shuo in his eyes at all. He sneered and said, That youngster isn't worthy for me to deal with him personally. Once he proves his strength, I'll play with him. Haha, I really want to see how you're going to play with Brian if he really shows up. Yaris grinned and waved his hand. He said, Let's go. We're already at the entrance. It's time for us to go in. Yaris, does that Brian really have that kind of strength? Talbot, the city lord of the City of Wraiths, suddenly asked in a low voice. Talbot was the city lord of the City of Wraiths in the Death Dominion. Han Shuo had killed Portlam in the City of Wraiths and declared that he wasn't afraid of anyone's vengeance. Talbot hesitated and didn't dare to make a move on Han Sho. This time, under Yaris's invitation, he personally came to the fringe to demand an explanation. Yaris's face turned solemn. He said in a low voice, "Brian has never been active in the dominion of God of Light. It's only natural that Jar doesn't know his strength. But in the Death and Darkness dominions, Brian has fought many times. His strength shouldn't be any weaker than yours, right? If he wasn't strong enough, Darkwater, Darkstone, and I would have killed him back in the City of Gorging Clouds. Are you sure you can defeat him this time?" Talbot's expression changed slightly and his voice became even softer. Yaris shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "Not yet. Even with the help of the two of you, I still can't see through him. However, Jar and the others don't know Brian's strength. If he's still in the fringe, we'll let Jar take the lead. Once Jar and the others are heavily injured, we'll retreat from the fringe and deal with Jar and the others." Yaris used the energy of darkness to form a barrier around the two of them. Our goal is different from that of Jar and the others. There's no need for us to get involved in this mess. If the situation changes, we will leave immediately. Yaris reminded Talbot as they walked towards the Amphilos. Talbot, who had solemnly vowed to seek revenge on Han Sho, grew more and more uncertain after hearing Yaris' words. His strength was inferior to Yaris, but for even Yaris to be so fearful of Han Sho, Talbot's confidence gradually diminished. He gradually lost the will to fight to the death with Han Sho. The party slowly walked into the Amphilos that had been renamed Hexopolis. McKinley was the only one who wasn't afraid of Han Sho. As he was on good terms with Han Sho, it was only natural that he knew that Han Sho wouldn't harm him. Therefore, he was the first to enter the Amphilos. As soon as McKinley entered the Amphilos, he saw Han Sho standing with his hands clasped behind his back. Beside Han Sho were Salas and Wasis. Other than Han Sho, Salas, and Wasis, there was no one else in the spacious street. All three of them had smiles on their faces. Han Sho wore a gentle smile, Salas wore a faint smile, and Wasis wore a cold smile. McKinley did not talk too much with Han Sho. He merely nodded and shot a meaningful glance at Han Sho, indicating to him which one was Jar. Han Sho didn't need McKinley's hint. With his current strength and means, he had long figured out who Jar was. Han Sho smiled and nodded, indicating that he knew what was going on and not to worry. He was the most violent and radical of the three Keepers of Light. A series of Jar's deeds flashed through Han Sho's mind. Han Sho thought to himself that Jar was a genius. He thought that only a person who dedicated himself to the God of Light and spared no effort in carrying out the will of the God of Light would be appreciated by the God of Light. The God of Light had even personally warned Han Sho not to touch Jar. "Didn't you run into him on your way here?" Han Sho put on a faint smile and said, "We have driven the God Hunter Alliance out of the fringe. There are no God Hunters left in the fringe. Everyone, if you came to the fringe for sightseeing, I welcome you. But if you plan to destroy the fringe, haha, I won't welcome you. Where's Han Hao?" Jar sneered and said, "I heard that he is also a God Hunter. Hand him over and tell us where his subordinates are. If you do that, I might just abandon this wretched place of yours and let you perish on your own." If it wasn't for the fact that Jar felt that he couldn't see through Han Sho, he wouldn't have said those words. He would have killed all of Tanai's men by now. But even though he knew that Han Sho wouldn't be easy to deal with, he still couldn't change his violent temperament. He behaved as though everyone in the world should listen to his orders. It was as though everyone but those who cultivated in the energy of light and believed in the God of Light were heretics and deserved to die. Han Sho had no intention of letting Jar off the hook. When he heard that Han Sho was so arrogant that he demanded him to hand over his little skull, Han Sho's face sank. He put on a mischievous smile and said, Jar, who do you think you are? Do you think you're worthy of such a condition? In Han Shuo's mind, he had already regarded himself as a being on the same level as the god of light who possessed the quintessence. It was only natural that Han Shuo was extremely displeased that Jar, a so-called follower of the god of light, was showing off in front of him. Ha! Jar was instantly enraged. He laughed maniacally and said, I, Jar, have lived for thousands of years and have never feared anyone but the quintessence over gods. You are the first person in all these years to act so arrogantly in front of me. Good, very good. Even if you hand over Han Hao now, you'll still be dead. Jar wasn't as cunning and scheming as Yaris, who wouldn't immediately attack without a word. The holy light on his body suddenly became blinding as the holy Aurum armor covered his body. Holy energy emanated from his body and the olive branch in his hand, making everyone feel pressured. Jar had a violent and direct personality. He wasn't suited to rule a city, but he was the best fighter. Of the three keepers of the light, Jar was the strongest in combat and had a fearsome reputation throughout Elysium. You won't see anyone acting so arrogantly in front of you anymore. Han Shuo laughed. He wasn't surprised by Jar's display of power. Given Jar's fervent belief in the god of light, it was only normal for him to have the holy Aurum armor. Before Jar could fully unleash the power of the olive branch forged by the god of light, Han Shuo summoned the cauldron of myriad demon and merged it with his 6 avatars in an instant. A new domain of divinity covered the entire fringe. The other Han Shuo in the void spread his arms. Lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, and a bone-chilling gray light descended and bombarded Jar. In an instant, the holy Aurum armor on Jar's body couldn't withstand the attack and cracked. As soon as Jar's olive branch condensed holy light, an enormous gray pillar of light suddenly descended from the sky and smashed into Jar. Rumble! Jar's body exploded. Fragments of the golden armor shot out in all directions. Amidst the holy golden light, Jar's blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Han Shuo waved his hand and tried to use the cauldron of myriad demon to absorb Jar's divine soul. At that moment, a blinding white light in Jar's divine soul suddenly erupted with holy energy and melodious sacred music. The blinding white light morphed into the most common type of light sword and stabbed at Han Shuo. Han Shuo's expression suddenly changed. He sensed the power of the god of light's quintessence from the white light. The white light was probably a mark left by the god of light in Jar's divine soul. Now that it had enveloped Jar's divine soul, it suddenly attacked Han Shuo. In an instant, Han Shuo realized that the god of light must have noticed Jar when he met him in the amphilas. Therefore, he added an additional wave of attack to Jar's divine soul. The white light morphed into a light sword and stabbed at Han Shuo. Han Shuo had a feeling that it was unavoidable. He had no choice but to form a giant gray net with the energy of his 6 avatars to trap it. Han Shuo focused all his energy on the giant net. Han Shuo was highly focused. His spirit, chi, and spirit were at their peak. Suddenly, the avatar formed from fighting aura moved. At the same time, the avatar formed from the energy of light absorbed a portion of the energy of light that had yet to dissipate after Jar's explosion. To Han Shuo's surprise, the 2 avatars formed from fighting aura and the energy of light had miraculously fused into one. At the same time, the other 5 avatars that cultivated in the energy of life, fire, space-time, destiny, and earth also merged with the one avatar. The 7 elemental energies of light, fighting aura, life, fire, space-time, destiny, and earth formed another huge avatar of God in an instant. Then, it once again released a giant net to trap the light sword. What a genius! You can actually use the energy of my quintessence to make another breakthrough. Very good. It seems that the opening of Sky Castle is not far away. Suddenly, the voice of the god of light came from the white light. Then, the white light no longer persistently attacked Han Shuo. Instead, it wrapped around Jar's divine soul and disappeared instantly. This series of changes happened in the blink of an eye. It started abruptly and ended in an instant. Han Sho had a very strange feeling in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the two huge shadows above his head. He sensed the incompatible aura of the two avatars and had a strange expression on his face. He had been trying to fuse the other 7 elemental energies into his original avatar, but had never considered the possibility of this happening. Light and darkness opposed each other. Death and life opposed each other. Water and fire were incompatible. Therefore, it was very difficult to fuse the 3 energies of light, life, and fire. On the other hand, there was no barrier between the 3 energies of light, life, and fire. The energy of fighting aura was somewhat similar to the energy of light. Under the stimulation of the God of Light's quintessence, none of the 7 elemental energies were fused into his original avatar. Instead, they formed another avatar. On one side was an avatar of death, destruction, darkness, water, lightning, and wind. On the other side was an avatar of light, life, fire, earth, destiny, space-time, and fighting aura. The 2 avatars had completely different auras. They seemed to belong to 2 extremes. "Since the God Hunters are not here, we shall not disturb you any further." Yaris suddenly spoke up just as Han Sho was lost in his thoughts. He anxiously signaled to Talbot with his eyes, hinting for him to get out of the way. Chapter 994. They were completely awed by Han Sho's methods. As one of the 3 keepers of light, Jar had made a name for himself on Elysium for a long time. Countless experts had fallen at his hands. For so many years, Jar had been the #1 warrior in the God of Light's dominion and was feared by all. Yet, Han Sho had effortlessly killed such a formidable character. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. Not even the wisp of God of Light's white light that was imbued in Jar's divine soul could harm Han Sho. Instead, it expressed its admiration for Han Sho and quietly left. Yaris was a man of great wisdom and vision. He could sense the existence of the God of Light just from that wisp of weak energy from the God of Light's quintessence. His #1 warrior, Jar, had been killed, but the God of Light did not kill Han Sho immediately. Instead, he said those words. Yaris immediately realized that Han Sho was not someone he could deal with. When he thought of Han Sho's massacre in the dominion of death and darkness, as well as the 2 overgods' playful attitude, Yaris vaguely grasped some things. Talbot finally understood why Yaris was so afraid of Han Sho. He immediately retreated after hearing Yaris's shout. He no longer dared to harbor any thoughts of revenge against Han Sho. He had completely forgotten about Han Sho's arrogance in the City of Wraiths. Yaris and Talbot exchanged glances before they stared at Han Sho with vigilant gazes. They retreated step by step from the Amphilas, fearing that Han Sho would suddenly make a move and leave them forever in the Amphilas that had been renamed the Amphilas. The Divine Guard chiefs who came with Jar felt a chill run down their spine when they saw that Jar was killed by Han Sho in an instant. When the divine seal of God of Light transformed into a strand of white light and vanished, the fear in their hearts grew infinitely greater. Hearing Jar's words of farewell, those people did not hesitate to speak up. "If the God Hunter Alliance isn't here, we won't disturb you. We came to the Amphilas for the sake of the God Hunter Alliance. We have no intention of becoming enemies with the Pandemonium. We still have important matters to attend to. There's no need to send us off." After Yaris, everyone used different excuses to leave. Without waiting for Han Sho's reply, they all looked at Han Sho as if they were facing a formidable enemy and slowly retreated. The only person standing in front of Han Sho was the overjoyed McKinley. McKinley's eyes were glistening as he stared at the blood splattering from Jar's body. He muttered, "Dead? Just like that. You're finally finished." Han Sho, who was immersed in the joy of his breakthrough, snapped out of it when he heard Yaris's words. However, Han Sho didn't look at Yaris and the others. Instead, he pretended to be deep in thought and stood there motionlessly. The divine guards from the 12 dominions possessed extraordinary strength. Yaris and a few of them even possessed over-god strength. Therefore, Han Sho didn't pay much attention to them. After pondering for a moment, Han Sho decided that there was no need for him to deal with those people. On one hand, he didn't want to anger the 12 over-gods behind them so soon. On the other hand, Han Sho had overheard the conversation between Yaris and Talbot. The war of the gods that would engulf the 12 dominions was about to begin. Han Sho was still looking forward to the battle between Yaris and Talbot. Naturally, he wouldn't come looking for trouble with him. Han Sho had no intention of participating in the war of the gods. Therefore, it would be wise for him to remain silent at such a crucial moment. With that thought in mind, Han Sho ignored Yaris and the others as they quietly left. He pretended to be deep in thought about his breakthrough. When Yaris and the others saw that Han Sho wasn't even looking at them, they hastened their retreat. When they were out of the valley, they immediately turned around and left as fast as they could. In the blink of an eye, the chiefs of divine guards from the 12 dominions had retreated at a much faster speed than when they arrived. It was as though they were afraid that Han Sho would react and attack them. "Brian, are we just going to let them leave?" Wasis, who was standing beside Han Sho, hesitated for a moment before he softly asked. Han Sho put on a smile and replied, "They all have quintessence over-gods backing them. Some of them have over-god imprints in their souls. It wouldn't be wise for us to keep them in the fringe. Let them be. They will fight each other anyway." "You mean they will fight among themselves?" Salus was stunned for a moment before he asked in astonishment. "Of course. Just wait and see. The moment we leave the fringe, they will start a war." Who would have thought that the new war of the gods would start in our direction?" explained Han Sho. "I will remain neutral. I don't want to get involved," said McKinley. It was at this moment that McKinley took a deep breath and bowed at Han Sho. In a deadpan manner, he said, "Brian, it's all thanks to you that we have a grudge for so many years." Han Sho gestured at McKinley and smilingly said, "You don't have to say that given our friendship." McKinley, you better hurry back to Ethereal City as soon as possible. Their battle might affect Ethereal City. You need to be prepared." "I understand," nodded McKinley. After pondering for a moment, he looked at Han Sho with a grave face and asked, "Brian, Jar's divine soul is still intact. Is that white light that envelopes him really the god of light?" "That's right." Han Sho's expression changed slightly. He said to McKinley, "You don't have to think too much about this. The god of light has protected Jar's divine soul. I have no way to completely destroy him. However, Jar is in a terrible state. Back then, only your divine soul and divine body were separated. Although Jar's divine soul is unharmed, his divine body is completely destroyed. You can say that you have avenged your grudge. I'm already satisfied. However, I'm a little worried about you. The God of Light has remembered you. I'm afraid that something bad will happen to you." McKinley frowned and paused for a moment before he lamented, "I really don't know how you cultivate to be able to kill Jar so effortlessly. You don't have to worry about me." Han Sho smiled and said, "Don't worry, I have the ability to protect myself. You should return to Ethereal City as soon as possible. Ethereal City needs you the most right now." "Alright, I'll be on my way. Take care, Brian." McKinley did not waste any more time talking to Han Sho. He decisively left the city and followed behind Yaris and the others. The might of the battle had awed all the invading divine guards. A crisis had been easily resolved. The fringe shouldn't be facing any more dangers for the time being. We still need to hurry up with the reconstruction of Hexopolis. I'll be returning to Pandemonium first. You guys stay here. If you encounter any problems, just contact me through the magical mirror and I'll be there as soon as possible." With the God Hunter Alliance no longer in danger, Yaris and the others hastily retreated from the fringe. Han Sho was certain that the fringe would be safe for a long time to come. He then began to arrange some new tasks. "Alright, we will gather all the remaining gods in the fringe in Hexapolis. We will govern the place according to your rules. Don't worry, we will take good care of the place. We won't let anything happen to it," said Salus. He was in a good mood and was smiling happily. From now on, there would be fewer conflicts in the fringe. Without Tyre, Asura, and Log, those three despicable fellows, they would be able to properly govern the fringe. Once the War of the Gods kicked off, many from the 12 dominions would flock to the fringe. At that time, the fringe would return to its former glory, perhaps even stronger than before. "All right, I'll leave this place to the two of you for the time being. Let's keep in touch," said Han Sho smilingly before he left Hexapolis. "All right, I'll leave this place to the two of you for the time being. Let's keep in touch," said Han Sho smilingly before he left Hexapolis. With his current level of consciousness, he could sense any abnormalities in Hexapolis even though he was in Pandemonium. If there were any enemies around Hexapolis, he wouldn't even need Wazer or Salus to inform him. He would have known about them beforehand. Therefore, Han Sho was very relieved. Soon enough, Han Sho returned to Pandemonium. Thanks to the innate powers of the 5 elite zombies, the Pandemonium was gradually restored to its original state. The cracks in the ground had all healed and Tanai was once again shrouded in the mist that lingered around Tanai all year round. After returning to Pandemonium, Han Sho started to rebuild the Pandemonium. First, he had the 5 elite zombies alter the structure of the mountains around the Pandemonium according to the structure he had in mind. Then, he used his immense energy to alter the edicts of heaven and earth. He even collapsed the earth, moved the mountains, and filled in the seas. Han Sho's mental state had reached the demonic lord realm. Adding the energy he had gained from the fusion of his 13 avatars, Han Sho was unprecedentedly powerful. He spent all his effort in refining the 9th realm mystical Een Harvester in the chaotic land of Elysium. The 9th realm mystical Een Harvester was able to attract Han Sho from another universe in a small place like Profound Continent, turning Profound Continent into one of the 5 perilous lands. Once it was constructed on Elysium, where the yuan qi of heaven and earth was 100 times denser, it would become a divine formation that would shock the heavens and make the gods weep. It was a monumental project. Han Sho immersed himself in it. Using the powers of the 5 elite zombies and his new understanding of the realm, he collected all kinds of materials from the Fringe, Ethereal City, and the Destiny Dominion. He didn't hesitate to spend an enormous amount of black crystal coins to fill the Pandemonium. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, time flew by and the Pandemonium gradually transformed. The Pandemonium, which was already enormous in size, was added to the surrounding mountains and lakes. Unbeknownst to them, the Pandemonium had expanded 5-fold. Tanai would often see lightning flashes, thunder rumble, and snow fall. Gradually, a wondrous land of incomparable grandeur on Elysium began to take shape as the War of the Gods began to unfold. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.